If members wish to remove the jackets, by all means, feel free. May I remind members and members of the public, the meeting will be streamed live on Webcast from the Oldham Council's website. So we move swiftly into public questions. The first item in Open Council is public question time. Questions have been received from Cabinet members, from members of the public, and questions will be taken in the order received. The first question has been submitted by Louise Hamlet via email. I call on... is Mr. Hamlet here? No? Okay, I'll read the question out. Sorry? 1 second. Should have brought my glasses. This one here, yeah, right, okay. We've got the right piece of paper. The first question is submitted by Said Murafali via email. Please raise this question at the council meeting. Ask the Mayor to read out the full question. Richard report into writing in 2001 concluded that Oldham Authority had done little to challenge racial segregation in education and housing. Yeah. It claimed many of the town's problems were not caused by race, but as a result of poverty and social exclusion. The Ritchie report criticised Oldham Council for failing to address segregation, education, housing, etc. The report called for more investment, partnership working, capitalising on the mood of the togetherness and placing more focus on young people and education amongst factors to help ensure the delivery of its vision. We, the residents of Town Centre base, especially from Primrose Bank and Coppice, would like the local authority and regional schools commissioners to carry out independent investigations into, if possible, a Town Centre case for being socially excluded from good, outstanding primary and secondary schools due to each individual school admission criteria. Oldham Council are backing plans for a new school and discriminates against children who are not religious and children whose religion is not a member of the Interfaith Forum. A proposed Church of England faith school in Oldham will select 50% of its pupils based on their parents' religion. The Kramer Education Trust, affiliated with the C of E, is proposing a new Christian faith school in West Oldham. As yet unnamed, will select 50% of its pupils based on their parents' religion. How is this school going to address the shortages of secondary school places for residents of Town Centre based, especially from Coppice and Primrose Bank? What is the current position of Oldham Council supporting, promoting faith schools? I call on Councillor Jakes to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is now more than 17 years since the disturbances in 2001. Significant progress has been made since then in addressing the problems identified in this report. It's important that we now move on and focus on Oldham today. We have an ambitious Oldham plan which sets out proposals for creating an inclusive economy which offers opportunities for all, working with residents to deliver cooperative services which meet their needs, and developing thriving communities in ways which build the capacity for people to support themselves and others. A key part of this plan is to ensure that we have enough good and outstanding schools for all our children and young people. Our support for the free school proposed by the Cranmer Trust is to help achieve this objective. The existing Bluecoat School is a high-performing and respected across the borough. The new school will be a separate entity but will benefit from the expertise of Bluecoat. The new school will have its own admission policy and certainly not exclude disadvantaged students. It will be fully accessible to parents in Coppice and Primrose Bank. The proposed admissions policy set out by the Cranmer Trust has been reviewed by council officers, and our pupil projection figures tell us it will ensure that local children to which the question refers will also receive a place, while the school will also be able to offer and ensure a multi-ethnic, population with an ethos of togetherness which ties in with the recommendations of the Ritchie report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jakes, for the reply. The next question has been submitted by Louise Hamlet by email. I call on... No, email. Mr Mayor, I would like to ask this question to the Leader of the Council. In July, the Shaw and Crompton Events Group agreed that as this year of 2018 is the century of the First World War, they would like to show their respect and appreciation to those who sacrificed so much. So they set about to put poppies up and on every lamppost within the town centre of Shaw and Crompton. In a very wet and windy weekend, all lampposts in July were furnished with these poppies. Coincidentally, I now notice that something similar has been done in Parliament Square by Town Centre Oldham ahead of the Remembrance Day. I'd like to ask and invite the Leader of the administration to thank the events group for their hard work and dedication to our forefathers. I call on Councillor Fielding to respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Mr Hamblett for his question. It is important that we commemorate the contribution of British and Commonwealth military and civilian servicemen and women in the two world wars and later conflicts, particularly in this centenary year. I do offer thanks on behalf of the Council to the Shaw and Crompton Events Group for displaying the poppies on the lampposts, but I also want to offer thanks to the countless volunteers and branches of the Royal British Legion across the borough who are involved in organising the several Remembrance Sunday events which will be taking place this weekend. I'd like also to draw attention to the Stories of Sacrifice exhibition which is currently on at Gallery Oldham. This is a special touring exhibition from the British Muslim Heritage Centre which is dedicated to the bravery and sacrifice of Muslim soldiers who fought during World War I. It's an excellent exhibition and we're very lucky to have it here in Oldham, and I would encourage people to go and visit before it finishes on December the 1st. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for your reply. The next question is submitted by Chris Ackroyd via email. How can I trust a Labour administration to look after my council and the town following the recent bloodbath that saw Councillor Jean Strayton ousted? For the record, can I ask Councillor Stretton, can I thank Councillor Stretton for all the hard work she did, and she did not deserve what happened. I call on Councillor Fielding to respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Mr Ackroyd for his question. I think what vivid imagination some people have. The idea that a Labour group meeting and a series of ballots at the meeting were a bloodbath, it makes it sound far more exciting than it was. Labour group meetings are a fairly pedestrian affair, I'm afraid to say. I suppose, in terms of answering the question about whether you can trust this Labour administration, I'll be making the Leader's annual statement later. I'll be referring to what I talked about 6 months ago when I was elected as the Leader, and what progress we've made and what has been delivered since then. And so you should judge us on our record, Mr Ackroyd, and that is what I would advise you to do after listening to the Leader's address later this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for your reply. The next question has been submitted by Don and Gould by email. Parish councils add value to the area of Oldham, providing an enhanced service to their residents, when areas are often forgotten about or ignored by some at Oldham Council. For those wishing to form a parish council, how would one go about setting a parish council up? Following the Leader's comments, does the council leader support parish councils, and would he support the establishment of a parish council, say in his own ward, Failsworth? I call on Councillor Fielding to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do have to challenge the assertion that there are parts of the borough that this council doesn't care about, that has led people to believe that the establishment of a parish council is necessary to fill in the gaps that we don't as an organisation. And prior to answering this question, I did go on Wikipedia to find out what the powers and duties available to parish councils are. Of course, not all parish councils take these upon themselves to deliver, but we have the cleaning and drainage of ditches, the control of litter, the provision and maintenance of public toilets, the right to be consulted on whether there is an intention to provide a burial ground within the parish area, and some stuff about rights of way. If you wish to establish a parish council in an area of the borough where it doesn't already have one, then the process is quite simple. You collect the signatures of 7.5% of the electorate within the boundaries of the parish that you're hoping to establish. You present it to this authority and we will conduct a governance review and then decide whether it is appropriate to establish a parish council. In terms of whether I would support one in Failsworth, I would have no objection to people in Failsworth getting together and trying to collate enough signatures, but personally I think that Oldham Council does a fantastic job of maintaining our ditches down in Failsworth. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for your reply. The next question has been submitted by Mr. Brown via email. I call on Mr. Brown to ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can a Cabinet member please answer how many of our 60 councillors replied to last year's consultation regarding strengthening standards for elected mayors and councillors in England? And there is a small B question, and the second one is how many knew of this consultation? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your question. Councillor Fielding, would you like to reply? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Mr. Brown for his question. The consultation paper was considered by group leaders at the time, of which I was not one, of course, at the time, and a response was submitted to the relative department in December 17. I can confirm that personally I didn't send a response as an individual. I cannot speak for other members of this council as to whether they made responses as individuals, but I'm sure if you were to write to each of them individually, they'd be able to advise you whether they did respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for your reply. The next question has been submitted by Mr. Bates via email. I call on Mr. Bates to ask the question. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I believe this is not normal procedure, but I'd like to thank you and take the opportunity of thanking Oldham Council for allowing me for this question. It is with a heavy heart that I stand here tonight, councillors. I would be grateful, Mr. Mayor, for a public explanation as to the reason why, suddenly, after only a short period of 2 years, Councillor Cheryl Brock, who is not here tonight, who possessed compassion and decency, verbally gave her resignation on the 5th of October to party leader Councillor Sean Fielding. This councillor was highly respected in not only Failsworth East, but the whole of Failsworth. She had many friends and neighbours locally. Concerns were raised, Mr. Mayor, because of the lack of contact for months with Councillor Brock, with her comrades. The reason being, she was an excellent communicator and a credit to her party. Furthermore, she was also credited for her tireless work on behalf of the lonely, the elderly and the most vulnerable, and I love Failsworth. Thank you.
Could Councillor Fielding reply back to this? Thank you.
All right. Well, first of all, I had no conversation with Cheryl Brock on the 5th of October. I'm quite baffled as to where this data has come from, and I've seen all of the social media activity and all of the things that are flying around there, which is very interesting, but has very little basis in reality. But I am baffled by the very premise of this question. Mr. Bates was previously a union rep in a place of work, and I would have expected that he would know that in common with so many other positions, it is not possible to verbally resign from the role of role as a councillor. Mrs. Cheryl Brock resigned from the council in writing on the 25th of October with immediate effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for the reply. The next question has been submitted by Mr. Kenyon via letter, and I'll read the letter out. It says, thank you. I recently read an article in the local newspaper in which Councillor Gloucester misinterpreted the truth. This misinterpretation of actual facts meant that myself and my fellow constituents, Peter Brown, were portrayed in a negative way. Is Councillor Gloucester willing to give a written apology to Peter Brown and myself for misleading the general public in this way? I call on Councillor Fielding to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid I'm unable to answer this question because this is, of course, Leader in Cabinet question time. And this is a question that is perhaps best addressed to Councillor Gloucester, who is neither the Leader nor a member of the Cabinet. My advice to Mr Kenyon would be that if he wants to seek information from Mr Gloucester, he should contact him in writing directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for the reply. The next question will be submitted by Melanie Platt via email. Members may or may not be aware of the Guardian news report that Labour councils in the northwest of England are refusing to house failed asylum seekers who have criminal backgrounds on the grounds of perceiving community cohesion. The government has agreed to their request and no longer will house criminal failed asylum seekers in the region. This means that they have to be housed elsewhere. And as the northwest is the nearest region, this means we are being expected to house these criminals with all problems this brings. Given the former council leader Jim McMahon comments this month that it will harm communities and be of no benefit to those who are asked to live within them, what steps are Oldham Council taking to make sure that the citizens of Oldham are kept safe from criminal elements being housed within the borough? And would the council leader, following the example of other Labour councils in refusing to house these criminals in a town which has suffered more than it should have in the past few years, I call on Councillor Roberts to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Council does not house failed asylum seekers as they have no recourse to public funds. In Oldham, the Government commissions Serco to provide housing and support to asylum seekers. The Council has a legal duty to consider individuals and families who are identified as in priority need of housing on a case-by-case basis. Social housing in Oldham is managed by our partner housing providers, including First Choice Homes. The majority of these are signed up to the allocations framework, which uses the Council's allocations policy to decide who to let a home to. Oldham Council's housing allocations policy states that a person will not meet the qualifying criteria and is therefore not eligible for social housing if she, he or a member of the household is considered to be guilty of serious unacceptable behaviour. This can include, but is not limited to, conviction of illegal or immoral purposes, committing certain criminal offences in or near the home and still posing a threat to neighbours or the community, being violent towards a partner or member of the family, misusing prescribed or illegal substances unless there is evidence to show that the applicant is adhering to a drug reduction programme and behaving in a threatening manner.
Thank you for the reply. We're out of time now, so we'll move on to the next section, which is Councillors' questions, ward and district matters. We have 25 minutes on this. Questions have been received for Cabinet members from councillors on ward and district matters. Council has agreed to consider the questions on a politically balanced basis. I call on Councillor Shuttleworth to ask a question submitted.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, the public council at the Chatterton Police Station on Broadgate in Chatterton closed in 2016 and now the building appears to be standing empty. Could the Cabinet member responsible for policing please tell us what, if any, services are being delivered from Chatterton Police Station? What are the future plans for the building? And what is the annual cost of the PFI contract? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
call on Councillor Williamson to respond.
Mr Mayor, thank you. And can I thank Councillor Shuttleworth for his question. Mr Mayor, I can confirm that actually in this building at the moment there are no services and the building is actually currently empty. On the second part of Graham's question, SOCO, the Scenes of Crimes officers, will be moving into that building, hopefully within not too long, within the period of about 2019 or 2020. But the building, Mr Mayor, is going to have to require some improvement and it's going to have to be modified for that purpose. On Graham's final point, which was about the costings, I'm unable to provide the answer to that, Mr Mayor, because the building is actually owned by the Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester. But if Graham would want some further detail on that, if I can find out more from him, I'll try and do that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams, for the reply. I call on Councillor Akhtar to ask the following question as submitted.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm pleased that since the last council meeting, Bright Tribe has announced it is withdrawing as a sponsor for Worneth Primary School. Local councillors and parents had raised their concerns about the way the school was being run for many years. Could the Cabinet Member for Education update us in regards to identifying a new academy sponsor for Worneth Primary and assure me and local parents that the Council will do all it can to ensure that the new sponsor will raise standards at the school? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Akhtar, for your question. I call on Councillor Jakes to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Akhtar, for your question. We are content that our local Pinnacle Trust, led by the principal of the successful Sixth Form College, has been approved by the Regional Schools Commissioner to take over Worneth School in Oldham. The local authority has an excellent relationship with this trust and indeed with all the other trusts working in the borough, and we are confident that the school will flourish under Pinnacle, working closely with the local authority. I am also very pleased to say that the head teacher from all our schools, irrespective of which trust they come from, regularly meet with the Director of Education and his team and indeed share data and performance targets. There is no doubt all of our head teachers and LA officers in Oldham are driven by the moral purpose of securing the very best for our children and young people. And they work together with this purpose in mind. So I'm confident in reassuring residents of the positive role of the MATs in our borough. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jakes, for the excellent reply back. Thank you. I call on Councillor McLaren to ask the question as submitted.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Crossley playing fields in Chatterton Central Ward are an asset used and enjoyed by football teams from across Oldham. Car parking facilities for those using the pitches are provided on Petworth Road and adjacent to the Ancora restaurant off Broadway. Both these car parks are subject to serious antisocial behaviour involving cars spinning their tyres, drug use, sexual activity, which are obviously a major concern for residents in neighbouring properties. Ward councillors have worked with local residents, Oldham Council officers and Greater Manchester Police to try and resolve the issues. A scheme has been put in place to fence off a section of the Ancora car park, and this section of the car park will only be available when matches are being played. The car park on Petworth Road lies within the Crossley estate, and a number of adjacent properties are adapted for use by people with disabilities, and the antisocial behaviour is having a particularly adverse impact on them. It would be of great benefit to the residents of Petworth Road and the adjoining tower blocks if the use of this car park was also restricted to match days. Could the relevant Cabinet Member please consider what steps can be taken to deter these people wishing to use the Petworth Road car park for antisocial purposes? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren, for the question. I call on Councillor Williams to respond, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Can I thank Councillor McLaren for his question? Colin, difficult one, this one, isn't it? Right, first of all, the Community Safety Officer, Mr Mayor, for this area has recently been made aware of the issues on Petworth Road, on the Petworth Road car park, and has arranged a visit for this week, Colin, with colleagues from our Council's Regeneration Department. However, due to the lack of information regarding work is ongoing to confirm who actually owns the car park and who is actually responsible for maintaining the land. Now then, of course, Colin, we recognise the impact that behaviour like this, Mr Mayor, is having on our members of our society that may be vulnerable or disabled. And as soon as the land status is confirmed, Colin, community safety officers will work in partnership with some of our colleagues to develop a response which will seek to resolve the problems currently being faced by residents who live adjacent to this car park. However, Colin, if that was in my area and I was one of his constituents, I'd be saying exactly the same thing, because I would not want to put up with that. Cheers, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson, for the reply. I call on Councillor Heffernan to ask the question as submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Winter is with us. Last winter, especially when we were battered by the beast from the east, we all praised our hard-working gritting teams, which got our network back up and running and demonstrated that they are ahead of our neighbours in this. The bad weather did appear to highlight a few issues, however. The M62 was closed due to snow. It did appear that traffic and lots of lorries had been told to go up the A672, which led to highways officers turning round several vehicles. Later in the evening, there were a considerable number of vehicles stranded around Delft, with vehicles trying to pass when it was not safe to do so. There appears to be some issues with the flashing warning signs, when some signs indicate a road is closed and then others do not. More than once I noticed that the snow sign at Tesco on Huddersfield Road was indicating the A62 was blocked long after the road had been reopened. With this in mind, can I ask the Cabinet Member if she will please ensure that a system is put into place that warning signs reflect the actual status? And can she also look at communications we have with the Highways Agency with regard to the use of diversion routes in the event of a motorway closure? Do we need to look at closing roads earlier to reduce the risk of people being stranded? Also, we have the situation where Lower Turf Lane Scout Head was seemingly removed from the list of highways to be gritted. It had only recently been reinstated. The gritters come down Huddersfield Road, spreading, and turn onto Lower Turf Lane. They travel about 300 metres not spreading, then continue on to Cooper Street, again spreading grit. That short, steep, downhill stretch gets very icy and dangerous. Children going to two schools, Springhead Infants and Knowsley Junior, aged from rising 5s to 11 plus, and elderly people use it. For a short distance there's no pavement. Pedestrians are at the mercy of vehicles. Can this short stretch be included again on the gritting runs? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for the question. I call on Councillor Shaw to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Heffernan, for your question. The M62 is controlled by Highways England, and where a decision is taken to close a motorway, there will inevitably be some disruption. However, officers have been working closely with colleagues from Highways England, the police, and our formidable campaigning MP, Debbie Abrahams, and they've resulted in an agreement that an alternative diversion route will be introduced should a similar set of circumstances be repeated. This will involve closing the motorway at an earlier junction to allow more favourable diversion routes and reduce the impact on the rural Saddleworth community. In regards to your point about the signs, every effort is made to ensure signs reflect current status. Any delays in updating the signs are kept to a minimum, even during times when the service is at full stretch. And in regards to the Lower Turf Lane point, Lower Turf Lane is not a main gritting route, and having been removed as part of an overall review of the gritting network many years ago, the road being unsuitable for heavy goods vehicles, as is clearly signposted. I can therefore confirm that the primary gritting route for this area does not involve turning down Lower Turf Lane from Huddersfield Road.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw, for your reply. Call on Councillor Taylor to ask the question as submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The ward councillors and many residents in Chadderton Central Ward were dismayed to learn that First Bus were making changes to the 415 bus service, which would mean the half-hourly service would be reduced to an hourly service. Many of our residents depend on the 415 bus route to provide them with transport to Oldham College, Oldham Town Centre and recreational facilities such as Foxdenton Park and Oldham Leisure Centre. These changes will have a detrimental impact on many of our residents, including young and older people wishing to access education, training, leisure and retail facilities. Elected members were also disappointed at the total lack of consultation with them or the service users prior to this decision being taken. Could the relevant Cabinet member please raise this issue with TFGM and First Bus and do all in their power to have that half-hourly service reinstated?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, for your question. I call on Councillor Shaw to respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Taylor, for your question. The issue has already been raised with TFGM and First Manchester, who operate the service. Unfortunately, the nature of the bus service industry is such that neither the Council nor TFGM has any control over the route or the frequency of their service. Due to their budget position, TFGM were unable to intervene to maintain the frequency of the 415 service. Furthermore, there is no duty on the operator to consult service users. Their only legal duty is being to notify the local transport authority, which is TFGM, if they wish to make any changes. Recently, the statutory notice period was increased from 56 to 70 days prior to service revision. TFGM have now also contacted First Bus and invited them to comment in response to this question, but as yet they have still not responded. We'll continue to engage with TFGM and try to address the bus service issues and improve the offer to our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw, for your reply. I call on Councillor Fithian to ask the question as submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Andy Burnham's visit to Royton last month to launch Royton's inclusion in the Mayor's Town Centre Challenge scheme was welcome. Could the relevant Cabinet member provide an update on the progress of Town Centre regeneration in Royton and how the Town Centre Challenge will help us to achieve this? Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Fielding to reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Fithian for his question. Since Andy Burnham's visit a few months ago, the planning application for works to the Town Hall and Library buildings the planning application for the works to the Town Hall and Library buildings has been submitted, and demolition has commenced at High Barn House, which will release a brownfield site for residential development and ease pressures on the green belt. We've also met with Chris Boardman, the Greater Manchester Cycling and Walking Commissioner, who gave an overview of the Beelines project that plans to create a city region-wide cycling and walking network, reflecting some of the objectives of the Royton Master Plan. The Town Centre Challenge will help us to future-proof Royton in the era of the struggling retail sector and also turn it into a multifunctional destination well linked to Greater Manchester's transport infrastructure. With this status, we can bring together all the key stakeholders and partners, and it also represents the commitment of Oldham Council to regeneration beyond Oldham Town Centre itself. Here at Oldham, we're committed to regeneration around all of our town centres, not just in Oldham, and we want to contribute to housing growth and stimulate and develop the local economy. Town Centre Challenge also enables the use of the Mayor's soft powers and branding to bring forward potential investment and delivery partners. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. For the reply, I call on Councillor Gary to ask a question as submitted.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As we should all be aware, the 200th anniversary of the Peterloo Massacre will take place on the 16th of August 2019. Given the significant contribution of many Oldhamers to the events of that fateful day, please could I ask what plans, if any, the Council has to commemorate this important event? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gary, for the question. I call on Councillor Fielding to respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Gary for a question. I'm sure that you'll agree that the Peterloo Massacre marked a turning point in Britain's democracy. It was the fight of ordinary people for civil rights and liberties, and these are still important issues today. Peterloo was one of the most important political events ever to take place in Manchester. There was a significant Oldham contingent of men and women bringing their children into Manchester to peacefully call for political reform, expecting speeches, not the bloodiest political clash in British history. Sadly, there were casualties from Oldham. It's therefore important that we commemorate this fateful day. Gallery Oldham will have a main gallery exhibition devoted to Peterloo from the 27th of May to the 23rd of September, and there will be associated talks to accompany the exhibition. Oldham is also working closely with Manchester Histories, who have been awarded a Heritage Lottery Fund grant, and we are proposing to join up with larger initiatives taking place across the region. We're also working with the People's History Museum, who are leading on an education and schools pack to ensure that local information relating to Oldhamers is included. Events are in the early stage of planning, and I will ensure that council members are kept informed as further plans emerge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for your reply. I call on Councillor H. Gloucester to ask questions submitted.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In Shaw and Crampton, there are social housing estates where the responsibility for the maintenance of pathways, roadways and weeds falls between the council, First Choice Homes, Oldham and Housing 21. Unfortunately, at times, the service provided to residents falls way short of expected standards, as one or more parties tries to pass the buck for carrying out the work and things are left in a mess. In short, the areas where these issues have arisen are Britannia Avenue, Oak Street Estate, the Smallbrook Estate, the Cunliffe Drive Pemberton Way Estate and the Cedar Grove Hawthorne Crescent Estate, and in Crompton, the Asherton Road Estate. For example, from time to time, Britannia Avenue can be a disgrace. The verges become in dire need of cutting, the curb edgings are weed-strewn, and litter is prevalent across the estate. Britannia Avenue is very close to the Shaw and Crompton Metrolink stop and does not present a positive visual image to residents and visitors alike. Residents complain to elected members complain to officers, and ultimately things happen. But this is not a satisfactory situation and it should not be happening in the first place. Can the Cabinet member responsible please outline what can and will be done to bring the parties together to convince them to adopt a joined-up approach and carry out the maintenance work that is necessary both now and in the future, so the lives of residents do not continue to be blighted. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. I call on Councillor Shaw to reply.
Thank you, Councillor Gloucester, for your question. Environmental Services and FCHO work together to ensure that the maintenance of the estates mentioned follow the same maintenance regime as other parts of the borough. The clearly defined ownership plans that are available ensure the responsibility for any of the works to be undertaken to be directed to the right area. With this in mind, I'll arrange to facilitate an on-site walkabout between officers from the Council, FCHO and members, including yourself, to ensure that there is a clear understanding of the work undertaken by the respective organisations.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw, for your reply. I call on Councillor Hewitt to ask a question as submitted.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is about the proposed link road by Russell Holmes and the planning application for housing at Knowles Lane. The Council's local development framework policy, number 17, the Council's DPD, Gateway and Corridor states that the Council will continue to safeguard or identify land for a number of future transport infrastructure proposals, including the extension of Leeds New Road. Paragraph 6.9 goes on to recognise that the extension is necessary to unlock the housing allocation at Knowles Lane, and the provision of the highway link will be part of the development costs at no cost to the public purse. But this link is for designated housing on H2.1.10, to which there is no objection. The objection is to the development of the Opal land, which is on part of Daisy Nook in its beauty. Can the Cabinet member for Housing and Planning please tell us the weight given to this paragraph and the policy 17 in relation to the other policies, i.e. policies 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 16, 19, 21, 22, 23 and 25, which this development as a whole does not adhere to and which would stop this development. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you for the question, and especially the paragraphs numbered. Can I call on Councillor Roberts to reply, please? Thank you.
Thank Councillor Hewitt for his question. The Knowles Lane planning application is likely to be heard by the Planning Committee on the 14th of November 2018. This means that if I was to comment on the weight that should be given to any particular planning policy, I would possibly be seen as predetermining the planning application or trying to unduly influence members of the Planning Committee. I hope that Councillor Hewitt will understand I will have to leave this to the Planning Committee to determine the weight of the various policies in their normal way. However, I am able to comment on the reason the Knowles Lane applicant is seeking to build housing in addition to the allocated housing site, H2. This is because the cost of building the link road means that additional house numbers are required to be able to pay for it. The originally allocated numbers of homes would not support the construction of a link road. without having to build so many houses on the site that it would be an unacceptably high density level that would clearly conflict with adjacent areas' housing density, its character and appearance.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts, for your clarification. I call on Councillor Adrian Alexander to ask a question as submitted.
Yes, back to Knowles Valley. Old maps show that this area of opal land is covered in streams, springs and pools of water underground. Hence we have local names like Springhead, Waterhead. Houses that have been built on Knowles Lane are already prone to flooding in their basements and cannot be got rid of. This is a big environmental question and part of many questions as to why this land is required for development. Could the Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning please tell me who is responsible for the conclusion that houses can be built on a floodplain by Knowles Lane in Lees? And how did they reach the conclusion that it is only surface water running into the area?
Thank you very much. I call on Councillor Roberts to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander, for your question. The proposed Knowles Lane development is not located on a floodplain, as illustrated in the applicant's flood risk assessment, a document that's been reviewed by the relevant statutory and council authorities and found to be sound. Whilst the development is yet to be determined by the Planning Committee, and clearly my previous answer covered some of that, it should be noted that part of the site is already a Phase 2 housing allocation. This, of course, means that that part of the site has been accepted as a housing allocation for many years, following the local plan public inquiry and the testing that such a process involves.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts, for the quick reply. Now, we're out of time for the rest of the questions, so we're moving to formal council. Apologies. I've received apologies from absences from Councillor Ginny Alexander, Councillor Hudson, Councillor A. Hussain, Councillor Moores, Councillor Raymond, Councillor Tour, Councillor... anybody else?
Councillor Raymond's here, isn't he?
No? No, Tatik's not here. Turner. Councillor Larkin? Okay. So those have been noted. Minutes. Is Council agreed to the Council minutes from the meeting held on the 12th of September? Everybody agreed on the minutes? Thank you. That's correct record of meetings. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members in respect of matters to be determined by the Council this evening? Can members declare any matters of to the meeting? Councillor.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, it's the pecuniary interest, pages 71 to 76, item 3 GMP.
Mr. Mayor, same item, same reason.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, same item, same reason.
Thank you. Councillor Heffernan.
As recorded, Mr. Mayor, virtual an appointment to the MyoCare board in the that part of the meeting.
Thank you. Also, Councillor Bashworth, Chawan Hussain, have personal interests by virtue of paragraph 15. MyoCare board. Please can they raise their hands for interest? That's done. Okay, thank you. Urgent business. There is no urgent items of business. The communications. Members will be aware that Councillor Cheryl Brock has resigned from her position as ward councillor for Failsworth East. I have been asked by members who would like to say a few words. So, Councillor Fielding, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to just to place on records my thanks to Cheryl Brock for her service to the people of Failsworth East, the Labour Party and the Council. I know that internally she was particularly well thought of for the contributions that she made during her time on the Greater Manchester Waste Disposal Authority, but locally she was also an active councillor all over Failsworth and supported a wide range of community groups with her time and encouragement. There's a number of groups across Failsworth which only exist today due to her involvement and the time that she devoted to them. And there are half a dozen alleyways behind terrace properties which she was instrumental in helping to transform with a passion for gardening and particularly the growing of food. I think that one story that I would like to share is during my time on the planning committee last year, we were considering an application for the expansion of one of the pubs in Saddleworth. And members who were also on that planning committee, I can see some of them already starting to laugh, found it very entertaining where Cheryl made a contribution to the debate about how that pub in question happened to be where she where she got married once. And she told the story of a wedding at the planning committee, and to this day I'm not sure what relevance it had to the planning application, but it was a great story and I very much enjoyed hearing it. So I would just like to again wish Cheryl well in whatever she goes on to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. Okay, next councillor is Councillor Gloucester. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, she wasn't here long, Cheryl, but she sort of mirrored quite a few of the things that I was on. I always found her a very reasonable and personable councillor to work with. And yes, I was actually at that planning committee, and yes, it was very amusing. So I wish her well in whatever she's going on to do.
Thank you, Councillor Gloucester. Councillor Sheldon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to add a small note of thanks to Cheryl from the Conservative group. Cheryl was an extremely easy person to engage with in conversation and a most well-respected councillor. I shared several conversations in which we spoke on many subjects, indeed those conversations which could put the world and Oldham to right. Cheryl came on to the council to work for the residents of Failsworth East and Oldham Borough and not for any political game. We will miss her open and cheery outlook on life, and may we wish her all the best for the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sheldon, for the comments. Members will also be aware of the recent passing away of former Liberal Democrat councillor and executive member Eleanor Ritchie. The Liberal Democrat group wishes to say a few words in her memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but I'm afraid it won't be a few words. Colleagues and fellow councillors, have spoken many times in this council chamber about former councillors who have passed on. All are sad events, but tonight I speak not just about a former colleague, but about a very close personal friend, and I might find some of this hard to do, so please bear with me. Eleanor Ritchie served with great energy and conviction as a councillor, representing the ward she loved, her home Lees, between 1998 and 2002. I've known her for many years before she got elected to the council in 1998, defeating Joe Fitzpatrick, and when she was defeated by just 200 votes in 2002 by Mr. Lees himself, Hughie MacDonald. Still is. She and her husband David were close personal friends as well as political comrades. Eleanor was born in Edinburgh, a proud Scot. She trained as a radiographer and married her first husband David back in the late 60s before moving to St Albans, where they raised a family. In 1975 they moved back to Oldham with David's work, and Eleanor immersed herself here in voluntary and political work, as well as holding down employment and raising her children. She also found time to study with the Open University, and I was surprised to learn she achieved a degree in physics and astrophysics. Key essential qualifications to be an elected member, I think. Her husband David died suddenly in a very tragic motor accident in 1996. By this time, Eleanor was running her own business, manufacturing special baggage and cases for military medical equipment for the Special Forces and for the odd Royal Family Range Rover. As a result, she knew some very handy people in the SAS and had no problem with debt collection. And also knew some very influential people connected with the Royals. Following David's sad death, she was forced to take stock on her life, and this included something she said she'd never do, becoming an elected member and a councillor. She served as Vice Chair of the Environmental Services Committee. At the time I was its chair,
Eleanor was always passionate about environmental issues. It was a subject very close to her heart. Eleanor and her first husband were, for example, both involved in a successful campaign to reopen the Rochdale Canal. She was also instrumental in terms of her role of a councillor of overseeing the rollout of our curbside collection scheme as we would recognise it today, something she was very proud of. Eleanor was one of my key supporters and workers when I stood to be a parliamentary candidate in 2001 in Oldham East and Saddleworth. She was one of the few people who could boss me around. She ran my diary and appointments, keeping things in order. She made sure I was where I was supposed to be, when I was supposed to be there, and correctly suited and booted for whatever the event or task was. Many people in the Liberal Democrats would not have done that job for all the tea in China. Eleanor did it as a volunteer with a smile on her face and with hardly ever a cross word. This is something I'll personally be forever grateful for, and something that speaks volumes of the type of person she was. Eleanor served with distinction on the personnel, education, leisure services committees, as well as subcommittees and on the Saddleworth and Lees area committee. She was a passionate advocate for community involvement, being everywhere and active in everything in the ward that she loved and lived in. That also included being chair of the Board of Governors at Clarksfield Junior and Infant School, not an inconsequential job. Eleanor worked for more than 10 years for the Association of Liberal Democrat Councillors up to 2013, and she was unstinted in ensuring colleagues across the country got a good and professional service. I know she was held in high esteem by her teammates there and by Liberal Democrat councillors around the country, because many of them attended her funeral service recently. Fortunately, after a few years, Eleanor met Roger. Some of us had reservations because his second name was Batty, but no relation, who shared her interest in politics. He was a Liberal Democrat councillor in Huddersfield, and in 2004 I was pleased to attend their marriage ceremony, and they then she moved out of Lees to Dalton in West Yorkshire. Here she was able to spend quality time with her 6 grandchildren and indulge her passions for cosmopolitan cooking, knitting and sewing. Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer over 12 years ago and sadly died recently after her 72nd birthday. I was indeed very privileged to have known and worked with Eleanor and to call her my friend. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. I would like to ask members to stand for a minute's silence, please. Thank you very much. Be seated, please. Item 7 on the agenda, petitions. There's no petitions to note. Move on to item 8, outstanding business from previous meetings. We've got 15 minutes for this section. There is one item of outstanding business. I call on Councillor Chowan to move and Councillor Marie Bashford to second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, we all know that good health is not just lack of illness or disease. However, it is also well known that environment we live in, air we inhale, water we drink, and influence of these factors with our genes we inherit determines our physical, mental health and well-being in the future. But it's also well known that poor, congested, housing, social deprivation, filthy streets, alleyways, unemployment, all play an important role in our well-being. I would like to point out a few facts just to highlight why is it important to create a healthy, thriving Oldham. So let's talk about air pollution. Toxic air kills around 400,000 people in Europe every year. And out of those 400,000, 40,000 are actually in Great Britain. And we are in breach of EU air quality limits since 2010, and now we are facing multi-million pound fines in European courts. Having said that, European air pollution limits are much lower than set by WHO, but even European countries don't follow the European air limits. So in UK, around 2091, schools, nurseries, and further education centers or after-school clubs are within 150 meters of road where illegal level of nitrogen dioxide emits. In Greater Manchester, we have around 20 nursery school and after-school clubs are close to dangerous level of nitrogen dioxide emission. And in Oldham, according to the Guardian survey in 2017, we have 6 nursery schools and further education centers near the road where dangerous nitrogen dioxide levels exceed. I think we need to ask ourselves, is that acceptable for our children, for our residents? But let's talk about another fact, food. So CEDAR, which is a Center of Applied Data Analysis, shows that there are 56,000 hard food takeaways in England in 2017, an 8% increase in 3 years. And guess where is the heaviest concentration? It's in Northwest. I'm not surprised, because its research has shown that deprivation is clearly linked with cheap takeaway food. Public health experts have warned us again and again about the heavy exposure of children to fast food outlets, and increased consumption of poor food leads to childhood obesity, as well heart disease and stroke in later life. In June 2014, the average English school had 2.3 takeaways within 400 meters. By September 2017, it risen to 2.6, and I'm sure most of them were in Oldham. So in Oldham, where over 27% population is under the age of 20, and 29% of children under the age of 16 are living in poverty, we have over 21% children between age 10 to 11 classified as obese, not overweight, as obese. Colleagues, these are just few examples. I can go on and on and on, but we have to remember that we have been left dry by Westminster, cuts after cuts to services have made things worse. No wonder it's been described as daylight robbery. It is also clear that no one is coming to help us to create a healthy, thriving Oldham. So what does that mean? Shall we, as corporate parents, let our children to breathe in dirty air? Shall we carry on feeding our children with unhealthy food at their school doorstep? Shall we let our residents to develop mental health and respiratory conditions due to poor housing, or let cold winter and poor housing to increase deaths? No, colleagues, we will own our problems, we will find the solutions, we will fulfill our responsibilities towards our residents.
Move extension. Okay, thank you.
We will work with communities, with partners, with businesses to improve health of our residents. We will put health and well-being in the middle of everything we do, from housing to parks to planning to education, and we will create health improvement zones. We will create everything we need to do to protect our children, to protect our residents. I urge you to support this motion and send a clear message to our residents that we are guardian of your physical, mental, and social well-being. We will work with you to protect and improve your well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. Pass the mic to Councillor Marie Bashforth. If I can just say that we're actually struggling for time. We've got quite a heavy agenda, so if we can just keep to time, please. Thank you.
Yep, okay. So as we've heard from Councillor Chauhan, there are environmental challenges around health and social care in our borough. A way forward would be to create a health impact assessment process, as this assessment would allow us to monitor the health impact and plans or projects around environmental factors such as housing, transportation, education and employment, and evaluate all positive or negative health impacts for our residents on proposed plans. The ability to carry out an assessment would be a major step towards supporting the prevention of ill health and improving health and well-being in our borough. We do want a healthy, thriving Oldham, where the benefits of giving every child the best start in life right through to supporting our older residents in the right and proper care for those residents. Implementing a health impact assessment process would be a positive step in a contributing factor in our aim to ensure that each part of the health and social care in Oldham works well and equally for everybody. I am pleased to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak? Councillor Harkness, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support this motion to look at improving health outcomes for the people of this borough. Liberal Democrats have long since campaigned for better health outcomes in this council chamber, including motions on hot food takeaways near schools, health equality for mental health, and more access for defibrillators, both 24 hours and in public buildings. Now, I support the creation of the health impact assessments to make improvements in health and well-being. The government report in February 2016, Health Matters Community-Centred Approaches for Health and Wellbeing, says involving and empowering local communities is central to local and national strategies for both promoting health and well-being and reducing inequalities in health. So it clearly points to delivering services locally. The creation of clusters lends itself to developing better local services. Now, the cluster that Saddleworth sits in has nearly 55,000 patients, and Saddleworth is almost alone in our borough without a modern integrated health centre other areas take for granted. Saddleworth people have, still have to go to hospital for some services places like Royton and Glodick now have on their doorstep. Our doctors provide an excellent service, but Saddleworth's population is growing and we need more GPs to cut waits. I believe Oldham Council and the NHS Local Clinical Commissioning Group should work together and with local members to enhance primary care health services in Saddleworth. And I would also, I would hope that the review would look at and support Manchester University's NHS Foundation Trust in condemning relocation of specialist NHS medical services for Oldham patients with serious heart conditions to places like in Yorkshire and the northeast of England. Heart disease remains one of the biggest killers for adults in this borough and in this region. We should stand together, stand up against the salami tactics of downgrading such services. We have some devolved health powers in Greater Manchester. Let's use them properly and not be bullied. The motion links in with the third motion, with the motion later today on child hunger, and it also links in with education. Addressing the health issues is a big job, and we need to get all groups working together and tackling together to fix this issue. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Martin Judge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I thought it would be good to speak in favour of the motion today as it ties into my question from a previous council meeting on emissions outside schools. Currently, the journey to and from school for many children in the borough is having a detrimental impact on the health at a time of children with a time when it's most susceptible. Air pollution from cars idling outside schools or on the roads leading in can stunt the growth of their lungs and increase the risk of asthma. But it's not just the children being harmed. Our residents that live in close proximity to schools are exposed to the same toxins every day, and we can't just expect them to get up and move to avoid the risks. We need to take action to address the problem, and this motion is a really good start. Whilst I'm on the topic of schools, they currently act as a magnet, attracting a high number of takeaways and convenience stores outside. Zahid mentioned earlier that we're in the northwest sort of a 2.3 outside schools. Well, in Hollandwood, there's about 8 within 50 metres, let alone 400. The choice of food on the way home from school is chips, chocolate, or a 39p energy drink. The last 3 stores to open outside a school in my ward were a takeaway, another takeaway, and a store selling exclusively sweets and ice cream. that adds to the other 5 convenience stores nearby. There's no use restricting the types of food on sale inside schools and educating children on healthy eating if all they're presented with when they walk outside the school gates are 8 different choices of unhealthy food. Now, we aren't talking about shutting down every takeaway or convenience store outside schools, but we do have a moral responsibility to recognise that it's a problem and say, hey, we've already got 8 here, we don't need a 9th. Living in any community should not be detrimental to your health, neither should be getting dropped off or walking to and from school. Our communities should be places where we thrive with good mental, physical and social well-being. The introduction of health improvement zones is a welcome step to prevent some of our current negative aspects of our environment and begin to help create healthy spaces for all. So I urge you all to vote in favour of this motion and let Zahid get on with his job in making Oldham a place that's healthy for the rest of the borough.
Thank you very much. Councillor C. Bashworth. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, I support the motion. Who wouldn't? I think we have a problem here, don't we? That we've got all the right ideas, we've got the right moral attitude, but there is obstacles in our way that we as councillors are powerless to resist. Garth spoke earlier about speaking in council about the proximity of takeaways to schools. We've all done it. I think I've done a motion on it. I remember going on the Vanessa Feltz show talking about this ages ago. But we can't. And Marty's just said, we've got 7 or 8, we don't need another. No, we don't. But the planning system will not let us do that. So we're stymied right away by that. We do have problems with idling traffic outside schools, and I think that's somewhere where we could make a start on it by introducing these no idling zones. I think we can really do that. But here, what we need to do here is perhaps encourage, not perhaps, what we need to do is encourage systems whereby children can be walked or safe routes created so they can walk to school to stop the parents dragging them in. And, you know, when I was a young lad, I was only a bit of a lad. And there were a nice green van outside the school, and I used to like my chips, and I still do. But if you're any of us of my age will remember that a ride in a car was a treat. A bag of crisps were a treat. You walked everywhere. You got a bag of crisps once a week if you were lucky. But we're full of these things now. We're not going to get rid of the proliferation of sweets. Thank goodness, because I don't know how to survive without them. But we do need to try and encourage more activity by the children so they can enjoy the bag of crisps or the bar of chocolate. But if they can walk it off on the way to school and back, we could be cutting out the noxious fumes from these vehicles and give them that bit of exercise they need to burn the sweeties off. Okay, but what we do need, again, we've got all the right ideas. We're going to talk later about these roads, all these fumes from these, and the government are cutting back on funding electric cars again. We really need a proper strategy. We're always talking about strategies, and I've been on about other strategies, which we might talk about later. But if we're going to have a strategy, they all have to connect. We've got all the right ideas all over the place, but they're not coming together. And I think we need to try and look at that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So go back to Councillor John for right to reply. Thank you. You've got 1 minute, sir, unfortunately.
Thank you. I fully agree with my colleagues on the right about, in spirit, what we're trying to achieve and what we should achieve. And I know there is a further question later on to the Cabinet member, and I answered a question about Settleworth Health Centre. Councillor Judge, thank you very much. Me and Councillor Judge did some research together looking at how many takers do we have around the school. But we have to remember there are some national examples of how to deal with these issues and where councils have successfully dealt with those issues using things like supplementary planning documents and others. My colleague from Public Health are working really hard. We are already on our way to design what we need to do. What I'm very clear about, that we can sit here and hide from behind one thing or another thing, but I think it's our not moral but statutory responsibility to make sure that we're not poisoning our kids. I don't think this next generation will forgive us saying you did not do what you're supposed to do. And as a council, you are setting the policies which were harming us, and you were sat there and said we can't do anything. And I'm personally determined, I've got personal ambition to make sure we do whatever is possible with the help of my colleagues. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll need to go straight to the vote. So does the Council agree to the motion? Okay. That seems unanimous. So that's carried. Thank you very much. We move to item 9, Leader's Annual Statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is one of the few items that doesn't have a time limit, but it does. I think that means that I've got half an hour, but I don't intend to use my full half an hour, I can reassure you. I first sat in this seat and stood here as leader of the council just under 6 months ago. But sitting here, or even standing up here and delivering speeches like this one, is not the place where you make the most difference for the people that we are sent here to represent. Whilst the ceremony and formalities of full council are a necessary part of the job that councillors do, you can achieve far more for our town by mixing that with being out in our communities, listening to the concerns and hopes of local people, and hearing the stories that our staff who spend their working week on the front line implementing the policies that we debate and agree here in this chamber. That's why, in those 6 months, I've spent time meeting teams from across the organisation, hearing about and seeing what they do, and listening to the challenges that Oldham's circumstances present them with. And I just want to take this opportunity to share 2 of those stories with you. As members know, we have an outstanding lifelong learning service, and it was a pleasure to visit the team down at Oldham Library earlier this year. What was an even greater pleasure was meeting some of the learners at the service. A conversation with a learner in particular that stuck with me was a woman who, despite having lived here much of her life, only recently learned to speak English. She talked at length about the opportunities that learning English with our lifelong learning service had opened up, not just for her, but for her family. She'd now learned to drive and was able to help her children with their homework when previously she couldn't understand it, and she was now seeking work. Whilst the value of that service to that woman and dozens more like her cannot be underestimated, the value to the borough as a whole is almost immeasurable. Another person able to access work and help their child with their homework underpins our ambitions to be a prosperous place and our goal of seeing every child school ready when they walk through the gates at 4 years old. Another memorable experience was a visit to the Integrated Public Service Hub on Holts Estate. Whilst the name might not be so simple, the principle is. We've all heard the saying that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, but that accusation can never be thrown at council staff and the staff of our partners working together down on Holts. The principle is this: putting all organisations who are working to the same ends together in the same room and making it easier for them to talk to each other delivers a better service for residents. So on Holts we have the police, First Choice Homes, council staff and a range of other partners all sat together in the same room working on making that part of our borough a safer and more prosperous place. Down at Holts I've heard stories of how this has helped 15 people into work since just the beginning of this year, how there are now thriving community groups where previously there were none, and how demand on police call-outs and A&E at the Royal Oldham has been reduced by supporting people in their communities rather than reacting when they reach crisis point. This is the difference that local government makes, but often doesn't get the credit nor the coverage that it deserves. But enough of those stories. We've got a lot that we can be proud of, but there is still a job to do. At Annual Council, I set out the 4 priority areas that this administration will be putting everything behind in order to make this borough the place that we all know it can be. During the campaign for the local elections in spring, my colleagues and I had thousands of conversations on doorsteps across the borough about what was important to people. Time and again, people raised not the huge issues, but issues around basic services, which, if not quite right, are often the things that are the most frustrating for local people. And that's why back in May, I promised safer and better roads, and immediately we invested an extra £813,000 on top of the £6.2 million already committed for this year. And at Cabinet, just a few weeks ago, we approved a £12 million 3-year investment programme to invest in secondary routes. On top of the work we've already done on bringing our primary routes up to scratch and the 24-hour repair promise we have on our busier corridors, hundreds of additional roads will now begin to see investment. And furthermore, the process by which we select where to go will include meaningful engagement with local councillors. And so my message to those out there watching is, if you have a road in your area that you believe is in need of investment, report it to your local councillor. It does make a difference. 6 months ago, I also promised cleaner streets, and we invested £600,000 in making this a reality. For that investment, we have 24 extra staff working on keeping our neighbourhoods tidy, and rotas have been changed so that street cleaning is taking place every day of the week. Of course, no matter how many staff we have working on street cleaning, they can never be everywhere. And sadly, there are still those among us who continue to drop litter. That's why it's been so encouraging to see so many people who don't just say that they care about their communities, but actually follow it up with action too. The Ghazali Trust in Glodwick and Mike Oldhurst are excellent examples of communities loving where they live, taking pride in their town and simply grabbing a litter picker and a pair of gloves and getting stuck in to keep their communities tidy. I was so inspired by this, or embarrassed that I had not organised this in my ward already, you decide, that my colleagues and I in Failsworth launched the Big Failsworth Clean-up to bring together local volunteers to keep our district tidy too. These are case studies of the unrivalled community solidarity that we have here in Oldham, of which I know other boroughs are envious of. I also knew that community safety was a huge concern for local people, and we had some shocking incidents on and around our Metrolink line just a few months ago. By appointing a dedicated cabinet member for policing and community safety, I hope that this demonstrates our commitment to tackling the antisocial behaviour of a minority which can make the lives of the great majority of our decent and responsible residents a misery. I'm also pleased that Operation Infinity, designed to tackle antisocial behaviour on the trams, has been a success, with no serious incidents on our section of the network for some time. Reassuringly, our efforts to tackle this were supported by the recent prosecutions of those involved in the sickening attack at Freehold Metrolink station this year. While nothing can undo what happened to the innocent tram passenger that day, the sentences handed out to those 3 young people should serve as a warning that violent, thuggish behaviour will not be tolerated in Oldham. If you love where you live, if you care about Oldham, and if you behave responsibly, we'll support you. If you don't expect our sympathy. Some of the biggest announcements at Annual Council back in May were on the issue of regeneration. Colleagues will recall that we had developed a master plan for our town centre, though other members and I and members of the public were worried about whether our proposals were sufficient to future-proof our town centre in the context of the struggling retail sector, and whether the proposals were sufficiently sympathetic to our town's heritage and the aspirations of our people. I've been clear from the outset, the future of Oldham is not exclusively as a shopping destination. Whilst there'll always be a place for shopping, town centres are evolving. In order to be sustainable, I believe we need a renewed focus on leisure, culture, dining, and to develop a town centre living offer that makes people from within our borough and beyond choose Oldham as a place to visit or to move to over our near neighbours. But of course, regeneration is not just about Oldham Town Centre. We've made huge progress on developing businesses, leisure uses and new homes elsewhere in the borough. At Hollingwood Junction, a £35 million development which will bring 750 new jobs and 150 new homes, the first phase, Euro Garages, is now open. The £100 million development at Broadway Green will provide 600,000 square feet of employment space and 500 aspirational new homes, the first of which are under construction by Redrow. We have finally submitted an application to demolish the infamous Hertford Mill, which welcomes, if that's the right word, passengers on the trams as they approach our town on the Metrolink. We could finally complete the development of the Freehold and Worneth area that has been desperately needed for so long. Though as well as not just being about the town centre, nor is regeneration just about the physical. And our action on skills and jobs is a crucial part of the social regeneration of our borough that will help us to build stable, healthy and happy communities. Just one of the ways in which we do this, which I believe it would be remiss of me not to mention, is Get Oldham Working. There's a lot of talk about austerity and government cuts forcing councils to retreat to a core service model and only offer statutory services, that is, the ones that we are only required to provide by law. And Get Oldham Working is not one of those statutory services, but it is one that we will be foolish to get rid of. In the 5 years since it was launched, 8,000 work-related opportunities were created for Oldham residents. There were more than 2,500 people at the Get Oldham Working Jobs Fair last month, and our Career Advancement Service is helping those already in work to move up in the world of work. Now, I'm realistic, and I know from my own experiences that for too many of our residents, including many of my friends and peers from back at school, the next step up the housing or career ladder with our borough where it is today is often the step out of town. Under this administration and my leadership, we're working hard to build the homes, provide the opportunities and create the environment that people want to remain in or even move back to. The third priority on which I pledged to focus was education. In measuring the livability of a place, it is impossible to ignore the quality of local education provision. And so in many ways, regardless of what we build in and around the town centre or the standards of our day-to-day services, if we don't get education right, everything else is academic. Now, we know that there are schools out there which are in need of more support to achieve our ambition of every school to have an Ofsted rating of good or outstanding by 2020. And so we're providing challenge and support to those schools and academies who require it. For example, facilitating a change of sponsor at Werneth Primary Academy from Bright Tribe to the locally based Pinnacle Learning Trust. It is fantastic news, however, that already 80% of schools in Oldham are rated good or outstanding by Ofsted, a figure that we don't shout about often enough. We also know that on education we have a shortage of places and some buildings which don't provide the best environment for our young people. And so despite being prohibited by the government from building new schools ourselves, we are working with good quality local sponsors to get the places that we need. For example, we're supporting Cranmer Trust, who currently run the highly successful Bluecoat School, to open a new secondary school in the town centre to meet the demand for places. In fact, in total, we're investing £37 million in new school facilities and currently have 9 expansion projects or new builds taking place right across the borough. For those who aren't aware, and even for those who are, I think it's worth repeating, that the Environment Agency have withdrawn their objection to the plans for the new Saddleworth School in Diggle, and hopefully we will soon be able to give local children in Saddleworth the school facilities that they deserve. Finally, I thought, these guys are supposed to cheer, not you. Finally, 6 months ago, I said that I wanted to make devolution work for Oldham. The Greater Manchester Devolution Deal is a huge opportunity to bring more resources and support into Oldham to help us with our ambitions. It's also provided us with the impetus to deliver on health and social care integration, launched back in August as Oldham Cares. It should shame us as a nation that there are wide variations in life expectancy between towns that are within just a few miles of each other. But locally, through what is termed the single commissioning function, essentially sharing knowledge, resources and expertise with the NHS, we have an opportunity here to tackle that. Immediately after annual council, we sought to maximise on another scheme operating at Greater Manchester level, that of the Town Centre Challenge. Our nomination as a borough is Royton, and nominating Royton will see the support of the City Region Mayor Andy Burnham thrown behind the council's plans to build on the regeneration that has already taken place there. The offer is also on the table from the Mayor to make other nominations to the Town Centre Challenge when we are well underway with Royton. There's far more to be extracted for Oldham from the devolution deal on job creation, improving standards of education and redeveloping and regenerating our corner of Greater Manchester, and by speaking up I'm determined to get it. Whilst it's been great to be able to tell the story of what we're doing locally to build a better Oldham, I cannot finish without making reference to the backdrop to all of this: austerity. The Prime Minister may have declared that austerity was over, later watered down to coming to an end by her Chancellor, but I don't think that we can rely on either of these being true. The fact is that austerity is far from over. We are still required to cut £17 million from our budget next year and a further £14 million in the year after. This is after already having taken out £208 million, or 42% of what we had to spend just 8 years ago. How can a place like Oldham be seen in anybody's eyes as somewhere that can afford to take some of the deepest cuts in public services anywhere in the country? The government's also pressing ahead with the disastrous rollout of universal credit, which has picked money from the pockets of local people and deprived our local economy of millions of pounds. This shows that regardless of what the government may say to get headlines on the 6 o'clock news, their words cannot be trusted. Whilst most of us know that the government has no intention of ending austerity, the very fact that they say it, that they say they will, is because they know that it's what the public want to hear. And because they think that it's what the public want to hear, it shows that we are winning the argument against it. My pledge to Oldhamers is that this administration will continue to make that argument. We will be an active, political, campaigning administration which uses every opportunity to highlight the injustice of austerity, which has seen Oldham the 6th hardest hit local council in the country for cuts. We will demand better for Oldham from everywhere, from Westminster, from Greater Manchester. We will challenge our detractors. And we will continue to invest in our town despite the financial challenges. And just when you thought I was ended, I can announce tonight that we will, after many years of saying we would, apply for accreditation as a living wage employer. We already pay the living wage to all directly employed members of staff. We will immediately begin the process to roll this out to staff in our 2 wholly owned companies, MyoCare and Unity Partnership. We're also working on a plan to ensure that within 3 years the staff in our supply chain receive the living wage too. And this is a genuine living wage, enough to live on, logically, paid to all employees regardless of their age. This is better than George Osborne's national living wage, which isn't actually enough to live on and is only paid to over 25s. It does come at a cost in a time when we are being forced to make cuts. But as one of the biggest employers in Oldham, we should be setting an example, and I believe this additional cost is more than justifiable. The administration is unashamedly aspirational for a better, more prosperous Oldham. But aspiration for a place as big and complex as ours is only meaningful if everybody shares in it. And so my plea to those out there watching is to be aspirational for yourselves and our borough too. As a council, we'll do everything we can to break down the barriers that may prevent Oldhamers leading healthier, happier and more fulfilling lives. Though for this to work, each and every Oldhamer also needs to aim high, demand better for themselves and never settle for second best. Together, with the right aspiration, with the right focus, we can bring about the change Oldham needs and make our borough the place we all know it can be. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding, for your statement. I'd like now to move on to item 10, Youth Council. And this evening we have attending Paige Tisley and Sam Coop from the Youth Council, and they'd like to present their motion. Thank you very much.
We are members of Oldham Children and Care Council. We are the representative voice for looked after children and care leavers and are one of the 3 members that make up the Oldham Youth Voice family. We are here today to talk about health and the health of care leavers in particular. As you may well be aware, from the 1st of April 2018 the law changes and the Children's Services should offer help to all care leavers up until the age of 25, even if not in education as used to be the case. This is in recognition that young people still need help and support in these early adulthood years. For most young people, young adults, that support comes from their own parents or family members. For many care leavers, this support simply isn't there.
Over the past few years, health has been a priority issue for us as a Children in Care Council. We have undertaken much work in this area to improve the health experiences of looked after children and care leavers. We have created the Passport to Independence that provides a comprehensive guide and information resource for care leavers, including information and advice around health. We have worked with the CCG and GP practices to raise awareness of the issues facing children and young people accessing primary care. We have also addressed the CCG AGM and the Devolution Difference Conference, sharing the perspective of care leavers and their health experiences. We feel that within health, we are having a voice and are helping shape the health offer for looked after young people and care leavers. However, it has come to our attention that over the past few months of a health inequality that is facing some of our care leavers, the cost of NHS prescriptions.
Currently, the cost of NHS prescriptions is £8.80 per item. For many of our care leavers who are aged 16 to 18, they are able to have free prescriptions and national exemption criteria. For care leavers aged 19 to 25 who are in receipt of DWP benefits, they are able to have free prescriptions and national exemption criteria. But for our care leavers who are in work or in higher education, they are not entitled to free prescriptions. Now, some may say, but they're working, they can afford to pay for prescription charges. But we would like to just highlight some of the relevant issues as to why this isn't the case.
We have 86 care leavers currently that are having to pay for prescriptions. Many of these are on low-income employment via apprenticeships or are in higher education. They do not earn a lot of money. With that money from their employment, they're having to sustain a totally independent way of living, paying the rent, the bills, transport costs, and food, for example. So many are managing on a very tight budget, where having to make a decision about paying for the medication you need or paying for food or fuel is a real choice. And we can share 2 recent examples with you. One young person who is on an apprenticeship and lives independently recently had to delay collecting a prescription for antidepressant because they could not afford the charges until their next payday.
Another of our care leavers recently shared with us that on falling ill and being diagnosed with a chest infection, the doctor gave her a prescription of 7 items, including steroids, an inhaler and antibiotics. At the chemist, the total cost was over £60. This was unaffordable and the young person had to choose which of the items they would get, leaving some of the prescribed medication unclaimed. What would your child or grandchild have done in this situation? Ask for help from a parent or family member? Yes, and they would have more than likely would have received that help, because the health of a child is always of the utmost importance to most parents. As corporate parents, we are hoping you feel the same way about us.
In the government's corporate parenting principles, Principle 1 is to act in the best interest and promote the physical and mental health and well-being of children and young people. We know Oldham Council takes its role as corporate parent very seriously. We also know that health and improving the health and well-being of Oldham citizens is a high priority for Oldham. Of the 86 care leavers we previously mentioned, we would hope that most of them are in good health and that we'll have no need for prescribed medications. But being ill isn't something that anyone can plan on, and the unforeseen cost of prescriptions is a concern and financial worry that we would like to see eradicated for care leavers now and in the future.
The cost of prescriptions is nothing compared to the health risk faced when the appropriate medication isn't obtainable at the right time.
We want support for young people as they move into adulthood and remove the barrier to accessing medication that is needed for good health by covering the cost of prescription charges for care leavers up to the age of 25, regardless of economic status.
We therefore resolve to ask the Chief Executive to write to the Secretary of Health asking that care leavers until the age of 25 become a national exemption criteria on prescription charges.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any members wish to speak? I've got a number of colleagues who expressed interest. So, Councillor Amanda Cheriton, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And can I thank Paige and Sam and welcome them to full council. This is actually, in my opinion, a very proud day for the council, and it's a privilege to stand here as lead member for Children's Services and welcome Sam and Paige. This is the first time, as members, we've ever had representatives from the Children and Care Council come to full council. As we're all aware, years ago, Oldham was seen as a leader. We were the first council in the country to recognise the Youth Council within the Constitution. But there were 2 key bodies within Oldham that we missed, and that was the Children and Care Council and Barrier Breakers, our body that our children with disabilities are members of. This is long overdue that we have members of the Children and Care Council that come to full council. We, as leaders of the town and political leaders of the town, make decisions every single day, and we meet every 6, 7, 8 weeks. And the things that we debate and discuss and make decisions on have a direct impact on your life. And some of the children in the Children and Care Council are some of our most vulnerable children in the borough, are some of them with the most complex health needs, be it physical or mental health. So I view this as a historic day, and I take immense pride in it. It's a real privilege that you're here today. I saw you two as well, just going slightly off-piste, do the presentation for the Stars in the Eyes Awards a few weeks ago, which recognises our young people in care and our care leavers as well. And there was about 400 people there. And this is easy in comparison. The way you two dealt with that was absolutely phenomenal. To stand up in front of, 60-odd people is nothing in comparison. So, really well done, and yeah, welcome. Moving on to the motion, I, of course, endorse the motion. It should embarrass and shame us as a town and as a country that there are people in Oldham today who can't afford their prescriptions, and they have to pick and choose which prescription to have. I think this isn't a third world country. This is 2018 in Great Britain, and that's absolutely immoral. 8 years of Tory austerity has seen a government waging ideological war on rolling back services and shrinking the state. And as we've discussed often here, this has disproportionately affected those under 30 and the most vulnerable, because those are the people that don't have a voice and those are the people that don't shout the loudest. And I think nothing epitomises that more than this motion, and we've seen that quite starkly. In Oldham, all we are talking about is 86 young people. So across the country, it's hardly going to be masses of young people, and the cost of it will be relatively low. But I worry that we turn into a country that knows the cost of everything but the value of nothing. And as leaders of Oldham, we don't want that town to be like that. I obviously agree with the decision for you to ask the Chief Executive to write to the Secretary of State for Health. But I think as a council, we should make a commitment to see whether we can do this on our own. And in the same way, last year, Councillor Jabbar made the announcement around council tax and the exemption for care leavers. I'll make a commitment to cost this up and see what that is, because for 86 young people, I can't see it being a lot. And as you mentioned as well, Sam, you've already been to a Greater Manchester Forum, and I know this has been received quite positively by the Mayor, and maybe there's some work that can be done there as well about Greater Manchester being seen as a leader and a pilot on this to ensure that our care leavers are exempt from this. So thank you once again, and I hope Council endorses this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chon. Thank you. Could we make it brief, because we're actually running behind scheduling?
Okay, I've been told off even before I start. Thank you, Sam and Paige. We as councillors and this council chamber, I'm sure my colleagues will agree, we're really proud of you. You're doing something which we should have done long time ago, highlighting so many important issues. I, as a clinician, have personally seen what you're describing. I've seen people where they can't collect medication. I've seen actually people not having food, not having medication, and we're trying to get nutritional supplements to them to keep their weight. It doesn't happen only to care leavers, it's happening to everyone. It's really unfortunate, and I just endorse what my colleague, Councillor Charrington, said. It's a shame that we live in first world country. As you probably know already, this is a nationally mandated exemption system. We as a Labour, very proud, because we nationally pledged that we don't want any charges on prescription for no one, because care should be free at the point of need. It doesn't sound free care to me when you have to pay for prescriptions. We also pledged that we will have a free parking in hospitals nationally. So make sure you vote for Labour Party so we can fulfill those pledges. However, locally, I'm very happy to meet you guys outside this meeting and make sure there are certain things in our control. So, for example, access to the GP services, access to other community services, and to discuss those initiatives, saying how can we improve those things. I'm also very keen to look at local resolutions of some of those issues you highlighted, saying whether local commissioning group, whether at the GM level, you can look at the ways, even if it's not free, whether we could have systems in place where you can pay it later. I've done it personally when I've taken personal guarantees from the chemist and saying, if they don't pay you, I will pay you, and most of the people have paid it back. So we need to look at what we can do locally rather than going back to my earlier conversation saying we can't do. We need to find out the ways to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chon. Excellent timing. Thank you. Councillor Williamson. Just be mindful of the time, please. We've got some...
Yeah, I've got my speech down and I'm not going to be political. It is quite apt that you bring this notice of motion to the council meeting, so thank you, Sam and Paige. Two notices of motion, one one before yours about creating a healthy Oldham and then tackling child hunger. I have to say the sentiment of your motion is admirable. As has been said by the administration, the CICC have done a fantastic job on creating the passport to independence and rightly highlighted that health is a key priority, not just in words but in actions. This is why, whilst I support writing to the Secretary of State for Health asking that care leavers up to 25 become a national exemption criteria on prescriptions, that hopefully once you've heard back from the Secretary of State, you could look at perhaps the dental charges as well. We have quite a bad oral health with children and young adults, so that could become part of a working group. And you know, I hate to say it, but perhaps overview and scrutiny could look at it for you. On this side of the chamber, we support the Youth Council, as you well know, the CICC and also barrier breakers, and we commend this notice of motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williamson. Excellent time. And Councillor Harkness, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly, and I do support what was said today. And you know, if we could offer free prescriptions for everyone, that would be great. And I think that low earners certainly should be protected, and we should be never in a position where people have to choose what medication they want. I suppose the only little thing I'd like to pick up on is, I suppose if I take myself back to when I was 24, for example, I was a teacher, been a teacher for a couple of years probably, and if I was a care leaver, I'd be exempt and get free prescriptions, and I'm kind of thinking, well, if that wouldn't necessarily be fair. But I think, like I said, in the cases you raised, the majority of those I think should be exempt. But I think, by giving a blanket exemption, I think we just have to be a little bit careful on that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Final call, Councillor Byrne. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been fortunate to meet these two young people, both at the looked after children Stars in Our Eyes and at the tremendous workshop they did a couple of weeks ago, where I met a lot of the Looked After Children Council and heard some very heart-wrenching tales. And I think as a corporate parent, it is an obligation to us to find some way of supporting this, supporting the looked after children who are still in care up to 25, who do not earn a lot of money. And I support Amanda Chadston's motion, and I have only admiration for the Care Council.
Thank you very much. So is the Council minded to agree on the resolution? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to that's agreed then. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. We'll move on to item number 11. Leader and Cabinet questions. We have 30 minutes for this. Let's see if we can save some time on this. The Leader of the main opposition will ask questions to Councillor Sykes. Okay, so,
just before I start my leader's question, can I just take this opportunity of wishing the communities in Oldham that celebrate Diwali a happy one, because as I understand it either starts today or tomorrow, I'm not quite sure which, but all the best to them. I'm all for a party, whatever the religion or none, so there we are. My first question tonight, Mr Mayor, concerns Tommyfield Market, and it's about people who are living with some great uncertainty. They're nervous about their future, or indeed if they have a future, and about a leader who's promised them a plan that will effectively deliver a new Jerusalem. But in this case, I'm not talking about the people of the United Kingdom, Theresa May and Brexit, but rather the traders of Tommyfield Market, Sean, our new council leader, and the revised, yet again, Oldham Town Centre Master Plan. We all know the leader, and he's just referred to it earlier on, tore up the old £350 million master plan, not good enough, falls short for what's required, to give a compelling vision for Oldham, and I wouldn't disagree. And I'm sure the traders at that time were grateful. And I think he described the market as much loved and a significant feature in Oldham. It must have filled them with some hope for the future. But since that time, the same traders have been living with more uncertainty, made worse by the fact that new revised, better than the old one master plan is still not scheduled to be unveiled until at least March 2020. Yes, that's March 2020, not March 2019, in 18 months' time. Most citizens in this borough will wonder why it'll take so long and why urgency isn't put into the process. With our recent experience of town centre regeneration projects falling behind or just failing to happen, think about Hotel Futures or Princess Gate, traders are right to ask questions and they deserve some answers. At present, traders report when their leases are up for renewal, they've been offered new agreements which would give them little as 3 months' notice to quit. Many of these traders have been in the market for decades with a loyal customer base to match, and one Levers even has its own blue plaque celebrating Oldham as the historic home of fish and chips. So how can it be right they can be put out on their rear in only 12 weeks? And I would ask, is this way to treat traders who were described as much loved? Giving them little notice means there's no incentive to invest in their business or premises. Some say that in any case a 3-month notice period makes their business now practically worthless. It causes them difficulties in keeping and recruiting staff, impacts on well-being of owners and their families, let alone their pockets. So I'd like to ask the leader tonight if he'll rethink the council's offer to traders. Will he do the right thing and agree to request to grant at least 5-year automatic renewable leases as a way to guarantee some future for their business and their staff? And will he promise that traders will be regularly consulted as stakeholders as plans for the new market hall, or not, develop, and that they'll be offered spaces in and around the new market hall which meets their needs and on terms that are affordable to them? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a quick 2 minutes and a bit. Councillor Feeling, thank you.
Okay. Alan, do I get 2 minutes as well? Oh, all right. I, of course, would also like to extend my congratulations, if that's the word, to those who are out there in Oldham who are celebrating Diwali too. Now, to the business of the question. So, in terms of the future of Tommyfield Market, go back. You know, we've had the problem with dates twice now this evening. October the 5th, I'm not sure where that one came from, and equally, I'm unsure of where March 2020 came from. I've never made an announcement that the new master plan will be unveiled in March 2020, and if somebody has made it on my behalf, then they shouldn't have done, because that is not what I have ever said. Tommyfield is indeed a much-loved and significant feature in Oldham, and any plans for a new or refurbished Tommyfield market will, of course, require key engagement with the stakeholders who are the market traders themselves. And to that end, I met the market traders not so long ago and talked through my ambitions for Oldham Town Centre in general and what that may mean for their future. And I'm pleased to say that that was one of the best attended market trader, I was told that that was one of the best attended market trader meetings for some time, and it was relatively well received. So, of course, I will consult with the market traders because they do have a key stake in the future of Tommyfield Market. Now, on the 12 weeks notice period, there is no doubt that the market hall requires some work. It was built as a temporary structure in 1993 for a period of 15 years. It is now 2018, 25 years on. And whatever happens at Tommyfield Market will result, probably, in them having to move out at least on a temporary basis. And so it is only right that we put into action leases which enable that move, if it's required, to take place. And I think that a 12-week notice period in the lease is a sensible course of action to take. But of course, as plans are developed and as plans are worked up and announced, the market traders will have far in excess of 12 weeks notice of what their future is going to be. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank the leader for his answer. I'm sure that's one that we might well return to once or twice as things develop, and that's good. My second question tonight, Mr Mayor, is another important issue, the shortage of social and rented housing in our borough. In Oldham, we have a huge housing waiting list. We have particular shortage of larger houses, and these are homes most frequently lost due to sales under the misguided policy of right to buy. We're also desperately short of homes that are built to meet the needs of disabled people or future-proofed for an ageing population. I know the leader will join me in welcoming the announcement by the Prime Minister, and it is nice to actually welcome something the Prime Minister does. It's a rare occasion, which was actually good news for our borough, and that's the lifting of the borrowing cap, which has prevented councils from investing in much-needed social and affordable housing. Following pressure from many voices speaking common sense, including myself and fellow group leaders at the Crossparty Local Government Association, the cap on the housing revenue account has finally been abolished. In their heyday, councils were building 4 out of every 10 of the nation's homes, and will we now see a council house building revival to build affordable and social housing if we are to meet the shortfall in new homes that we need in the future? Decent homes improve health and well-being, educational performance, and many, many other factors than just a decent roof over people's heads. We need to get on with it now, with more haste than it took this administration to recently adopt the idea of establishing an arm's-length housing development company that the Liberal Democrat group first suggested 3 years ago. The children's TV character Bob the Builder famously said, "We can build it, yes we can." Mr Mayor, I'd like to ask the leader tonight if he's going to adopt Bob's mantra by ensuring the council works with our social housing providers and supportive housing developers, and if they won't work with us, we just get on with it ourselves, to quickly rise to this challenge and build the affordable homes that we so desperately need, and as soon as possible. In short, have we got a plan in place? Have we got sites ready to build on? And when will we see the diggers on the ground? And will we see them very soon? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Fielding would like to reply, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to join the Leader of the Opposition here on Oldham Council in welcoming the announcement by the Prime Minister about the lifting of the borrowing cap. But unfortunately, we've still not received any details as a council from the government as to what exactly this means for us in practical terms. And so I think it could well turn out to be another example of the government seeing which way the mood is going, as it did with austerity when they announced the end, but seeing which way the mood is going and saying that they're going to do something when being very scant on the detail. I am pleased to say, however, that even prior to that announcement at the Conservative Party conference, this council was planning to build our own homes for social rent. Of course, the Leader of the Opposition made reference to the motion at the previous council meeting where we agreed to look into establishing a housing company wholly owned by the council, and those proposals are progressing apace. I am firmly in favour of councils being able to build and being able to provide social housing that caters for the needs of some of the most vulnerable and some of the poorest residents in our borough. I have accepted too many cases as a ward councillor where I have gone into substandard private rented accommodation, which is drafty, which makes people sick, which doesn't provide a place for young people to do their homework. It is unacceptable. And I think that the only way that we can do this is to build our own homes and get people out of that substandard accommodation so that we can really realise our ambitions of a healthier and more prosperous borough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. The next section goes to the Opposition Minority Group. Do you have a question, sir?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Because we are short on time, I've kept the question rather short, but to the point, and hopefully a helpful one. The question to the Leader relates to the gully and street cleaning, as you mentioned in the Leader's statement not too many minutes ago. Over the past few weeks, I have received numerous calls regarding unclean streets and the amount of leaves. The leaves in some areas are often so deep they're a trip or a slip hazard. My worry is also that if the streets are not cleaned on a regular basis, the grids and gullies will become blocked, and this will cause the council to spend more money clearing these out. Could I ask the Leader if all members of the council could share in the schedule of street gully clearing activities?
we as councillors could answer many questions directly to residents and without the need to delay the highways team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sheldon. Councillor Fielding, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sheldon, for your question, not least because it gives me the opportunity to talk again about the investment that this administration has put into street cleaning across the borough, which is fantastic news and has resulted in 24 additional full-time equivalents cleaning the streets of our borough, and streets being cleaned 7 days a week because of the change in the rotas. Now, as a ward councillor, I think that, as ward councillors, I do think that we should have the ability to see where our staff are going and cleaning and where they intend to unblock gullies. And I have asked for that information myself, and anything that is available to me in the principle of being a ward councillor should be available to other members of the council. So I have absolutely no objection to that information being shared with Councillor Sheldon. I would encourage him, however, to go down to our depot at Moorhay Street, because the system that we use to clean gullies is really quite impressive. In how advanced it is, and it maps all of the gullies across the, if you're a bit of an anorak, it's exciting anyway, if it maps all of the gullies across the borough and tells you when they were last cleaned and when they are next due to be cleaned, and that information is readily available on a desktop. So I would encourage Councillor Sheldon and any other member who has an interest to go and visit Moorhay Street. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be going to Moorhay Street then. May I remind members that full council has agreed following the leaders' allocated questions. Questions will be taken in order which reflects the political balance of the council, and I have advance notice of questions. Can I call on Councillor Shutworth to ask the question as submitted?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, at Prime Minister's questions on the 17th of October, Labour MP for Birmingham Sellyoak, Steve McCabe, asked the Prime Minister, who is a diabetic and wears the Freestyle Libre flash glucose monitoring system on her arm, about its availability on the NHS. The PM replied, and I quote, "It is now available on the National Health Service," unquote. For the benefit of those in our borough who live with diabetes and who may well benefit greatly from this form of device, would the relevant Cabinet member confirm just how available this is on the NHS in Oldham? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for the question. Councillor Chuan, could you respond, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shuttleworth, for your question. So, there was a national newspaper who done some surveys and research and discovered that it's not available in 50% of the country, including Prime Minister's own constituency. So I will stop you there. However, in Oldham, are people familiar with what this sensor thing is? So let me explain you. I love reading medical lectures. So there's a little sensor which is attached with your arm. What it does, it constantly, every 1 minute, measures your blood sugar. It's a blood sugar which is not from your little vessel, it's just under the skin. So the benefit is that if you are diabetic, you then can just scan it, so you don't have to prick your fingers all the time, which is quite painful if anyone is diabetic here and knows how to do it. But also it helps you to be aware of sort of like when your blood sugar is going down, when to act on it, and gives you better lifestyle and hence improves your blood sugar. And we all know that if you improve your blood sugar control overall, that will reduce the complication, including stroke and other things and kidney failure, hence the saving. I can go on if you want, Mr. Mayor. However, Oldham CCG follows clinical guidance by Greater Manchester Medicine Management Group on the use of this device, which was agreed in 2017. And then guidance contains certain criteria. And the criteria is you have to be type 1 diabetic, you should have tried everything else possible in the world, and you have failed miserably, and then only will prescribe you because it costs £1,000 a year. It's our understanding that some patients in Oldham, some patients already use the device on the NHS. Oldham CCG and Royal Oldham Hospital are currently developing an Oldham-specific patient pathway which will cover the use of the device for people in Oldham. The pathway is expected to be finalized later this month in November 2018. So, straight answer to your question is not enough people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chuan, for your eloquent reply. I can call on Councillor Leach to ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Leader of the Council and other councillors this evening have highlighted the increasing evidence of the damage to health caused by air pollution. It particularly affects young children whose physical and mental development are jeopardised. What will the Council do to minimise the number of car trips, to encourage parents not to drive their children to school, but rather to walk with them to school? What implications are there for the Council in planning for clean air zones and in considering new developments which will lead to increasing numbers of cars on the road?
Thank you for your question. Councillor Shah, could you reply? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Leach, for your question. This is a topic that the Council is taking very seriously and is currently committed to working on a Greater Manchester response as a combined response to tackle air pollution from traffic, which is essential. The work is being coordinated by TFGM, and they're currently working with each of the local authorities to develop proposals which offer the best approach to controlling air pollution, including the potential for an effective clean air zone and other measures which support a reduction in emissions from vehicles also. This work should reach a conclusion before the end of the year in accordance with the government directive, when the outcomes of the work will be shared with everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Shah. Councillor Akhtar, if you could ask a question, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I welcome the Council's support for the Cranmer Trust application for a new school, but however, I have some concerns about the admissions policy that Cranmer Trust is proposing for the new school. The application for the new school is based on the extra school places pressure from the wards surrounding the town centre. However, I feel the admissions policy of Cranmer Trust is trying to accommodate pupils from right across the borough, resulting in unfairness to pupils who actually require the extra places. Could the Cabinet Member please assure the Council that pupils who require the extra places will not be treated unfairly by Cranmer Trust? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Akhtar, for the question. Councillor Jakes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Akhtar, for your question. The proposed policy put forward by the Cranmer Trust will provide 240 places in Year 7 for Year 7 pupils on opening. There will be 60 places reserved for Christian children of any denomination, 60 places for children of other faiths. These places will be available to children from Central, East and West Oldham and beyond. 120 additional places will be available for those children who live within a 1 mile radius, and there will be 40 places. 2 miles, there will be another 40 places available. In 3 miles, another 40 places. There will be 6 secondary schools operating in East and West Oldham by the year 2022. For the context, Blue Coat and the new school will provide over 25% of places in this area by 2022. This represents a very fair offer to parents of children who live in Central, East and West Oldham, as well as guaranteeing a multi-ethnic mix in the school community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jakes, for your reply. Can I call on Councillor C. Gloucester for the question, please?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Can I ask the relevant Cabinet Member to update the Council as to the current position regarding the development of a new health centre for Sean Crompton? It's now 10 years since this development was first proposed, and despite the land and a brand new electric substation being in place for several years, we've yet to see any plans for this much needed and desired development, and the patients of Sean Crompton continue to be ill served by the current building, which is frankly far fit for purpose.
Thank you for the question. Councillor Chuan, could you reply, please?
Thank you, Councillor Gloucester, for your question. So the original scheme was put on hold with the end of Local Investment Finance Trust as a development option in 2011, with the introduction of NHS England States and Technology Transformation Fund in 2015. The opportunity to reconsider a scheme in Sean Crompton has been made possible, and a successful bid for funding to progress the outline business case was made in the financial year 2016-17. Since then, work to create an affordable GM Health and Social Care OBC project management brief has been undertaken and is close to completion. It has been agreed at the Oldham Estates Group that the OBC for both Shaw and Crompton and Cheriton hubs would benefit by being completed upon the results of local assets review. The premises utilization studies and updated estates plan in response to new model of care and ways of working each of these projects will be completed or underway by the end of February 2019. It was agreed at the States Group meeting last week that the results of the above work can be reflected in OBC relating to both schemes. It is expected that OBC for the scheme will be completed by May 2019.
Thank you, Councillor Chuan, for your reply. Councillor Ali, could you ask the question, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Winter is coming and clearly the weather is changing. Could the Cabinet Member for Housing update us on the action being taken by the Council to support the GM Mayor's pledge that every rough sleeper who needs a bed this winter will have one? Thank you.
Thank you. Could I call on Councillor Roberts to reply?
Thank Councillor Ali for his question. Oldham Council is supporting the GM Mayor's pledge to help rough sleepers by taking part in the A Bed for Every Night project. And yes, it does have an acronym, ABEN. The ABEN project went live on the 1st of November and will continue through to the 31st of March 2019 in line with the Mayor's guidance. Oldham Council is setting up a night shelter at the Oldham Fire Station to offer rough sleepers a bed for the evening during the time identified previously. Rough sleepers will also have access to shower facilities and be able to have hot food and drinks. The shelter is due to open on the 16th of November, and before that happens we're providing bed and breakfast accommodation for anyone who needs it, and I know that at least one person was booked in over the weekend. The night shelter will be run by the DePaul Trust organisation, and the provision is for male rough sleepers only. The shelter can accommodate up to 10 people. Women will be accommodated in alternative provision in Porter Street. Referrals to the night shelter will be coordinated through our existing housing advice and homelessness contract with First Choice Homes, and the service can also be accessed out of hours using the free phone out of hours telephone number, which is 0000 988 7061. Referrals are coordinated in this way so we can ensure that people receive the correct advice and support and are helped to find longer-term, more sustainable housing. Should the shelter reach capacity, alternative additional provision will be provided via bed and breakfast.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Next questions by Councillor Hack. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Although I think the leader partly answered this question, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. The new administration have reaffirmed their ambition to see regeneration of Oldham Town Centre. Could the relevant cabinet member describe the vision that underpins the new administration's ambitions for Oldham Town Centre? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Hack for his question. Our ambitions for we are ambitious for Oldham Town Centre. I talked in my leader's address earlier this evening about our ambition. And it's our ambition to see a town centre that is sustainable, that is future-proofed and that has a long-term future. When you're looking at redevelopment or regeneration plans looking so far into the future, it's not something that you can afford to get wrong today. And so that's why I've always been clear that the future of Oldham is not exclusively as a shopping destination. We really need to develop the leisure, the culture and the living offer if we're really going to have a town centre that is going to be sustainable and going to offer the kind of destination that people will want to come and visit, not just from the other parts of within Oldham, but from outside too. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. Can I call on Councillor Ball to ask the question, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could the Cabinet Member for Education and Culture inform residents of the much publicised difficulties in funding children's social services have had a negative impact on the level of support that's given to young people with special educational needs and disabilities?
Can I call on Councillor Jakes to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Ball, for your question. I am pleased to inform residents that the administration has fully supported the revenue costs required to ensure the Council achieved all the recommendations in the Ofsted written statement of action, which followed the Senate inspection in October 2017. Cabinet has approved a revenue allocation of £500,000 for SEND in December 2017, and this has resulted in the creation of strengthened the SEND team and created resources for the allocation to key areas requiring support. I am delighted to say the recent monitoring from DFE and NHS England agreed that 4 of the 5 areas identified in the written statement are now RAG-rated green, and the 5th is amber. Green with an expectation from January 2019, this will revert to green. There has therefore been only a positive impact on our children and young people with SEND. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jakes. Next question is by Councillor Harkness.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A good education is essential, and it is also the foundation of a fair society. We should not be satisfied with anything less, but sadly, far too many children are not reaching their full potential. Unfulfilled talent is criminal. These are not my words, but the words of the former council leader in the, at the Oldham Education and Skills Commission report entitled A Self-Improving Education System, which was in 2016. It also stated that by 2020, all performing indicators would be at the national average or above, and all education providers would be judged good or better by Ofsted. Now, we're in 2018, and the GCSE results across the borough have declined despite significant investment. Does the Cabinet member agree that the GCSE results are still not good enough overall in the borough, with a 1% decline in results, and with the direction of travel, it needs to be a cause for concern? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for the question. Councillor Jakes, could you reply? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Harkness, for your question. I think we should acknowledge the hard work and dedication of staff, students and parents, whilst recognising the changes to the GCSEs were far more fundamental than changing the grades from letters to numbers. Coursework and controlled assignments were not allowed this year, placing more pressure on students than ever before to do well in an increasing number of examinations that they had to sit in an intensive period of time. Subject curricula were changed to be more demanding than ever before to allow for a smoother transition to follow A-level courses. In addition, the English education system is designed to fail students no matter how good their performance, and I want to explain that. The government uses a comparability of outcomes measure to ensure standards are maintained, whilst previous administrations under the Labour government used a criterion reference system that guaranteed a pass if you did well in your test. You passed your test and therefore you got your qualification. The current system is akin to having a driving test system that once the allocated number of drivers have passed their test, no more allowed to pass, no matter how good their test results were. So yes, I am very proud of the outcomes that the young people of this borough have attained, recognising the huge pressure that any change brings, and still aware of the need to support schools and academies on their journey of self-improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jakes, for the reply. We're now out of time for that particular section, so we move on to item agenda 12. Questions and observations, Cabinet minutes. We have 20 minutes for this section. I call on Councillor Fielding to move, and I call on Councillor Shaw to second that the Council notes the minutes of the Cabinets are circulated.
Move, Mr. Mayor.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
Do any members of the Council who are not Cabinet members have any questions on these minutes? Okay, none. Can I ask, there's no question. Do any members of the Council who are not Cabinet members to observe any observations of the minutes? Okay. We'll move on to item agenda 13, administration business. We have 30 minutes for this. I call on Councillor Jakes to move and Councillor Ball to second the motion.
Mr. Mayor, it saddens and angers me that I stand here today in 2018 having to talk about child hunger. The reason for this is this borough has the 7th worst deprivation levels in the country. In one ward in particular, Coldhurst, it's the worst in the whole of the UK. Why is this happening to our children in this day and age? I grew up in the 50s on the largest council estate in the whole of Europe. Families had one thing in common. They didn't have much, the proverbial not a pot to pee in. However, they were all able to feed their families. The choice of food wasn't great, but they had a choice. It was interesting to see members of the council tonight struggling at times to make a choice of what to eat before they came to council. Not far from here, behind closed doors, there are many families making very different choices. It's not what they will eat, but whether they're going to eat at all or pay the rent. Whether to eat or pay the fuel bills. This is 2018. And this is Oldham in 2018, and I think it's absolutely appalling. How can it be that the sixth richest nation in the world treats its children with utter contempt? The government made a choice of hiding behind the word called austerity, which to me is a farce, really is a farce. This government has borrowed more money since 2010 than all the Labour governments put together since 1945. Yet they choose to punish the weakest and the most vulnerable members of our society by making savage cuts to welfare and in work benefits. How can it be, 60 years on, families cannot feed themselves? The decision to make families wait for 6 weeks or more without an income is cruel and callous. We have politicians like Jacob Rees-Mogg who think we should applaud the fact that more and more people are using food banks. British values? No, Victorian values. We have Michael Gove who thinks that we should open up our tips and waste disposal sites to allow people to scavenge for a living. I've seen that before in a documentary, Panorama. It was about poverty in Africa and Asia. We have a government that's made vile threats to remove money from charities if they're not nice to Esther McVeigh. Gagging orders seem to be the common thing these days. These three Brexiteers have a vision of Britain which is based upon the exploitation of people, where the rich get rich and the strong and stronger, and the weak are abused and left without hope. Esther McVeigh, who lies to Parliament, extols the benefits of universal credit. You can lie, but the evidence is there for everyone to see. In the growing number of people, many of whom are in work, who use our food banks. In our schools where children get their only food of the day. And hidden behind doors. It's a tragedy. So many families and parents in despair, not knowing where to turn to and not being able to look after the children. This is the impact of universal credit as on the people of Oldham. Removing the safety net allows these people to be exploited. Whilst the government celebrates the low rates of unemployment, what types of jobs are employed in 0 hours contracts? Having to work when your employer wants you to work and then discarded. Not being able to budget for rent, food or food bills. In the 50s, people worked long hours for low rates of pay, but they were employed and could guarantee a wage each week and to pay for those essential bills. I used to work in a school, and at this time of year, it was great to see what was going on. We used to collect gifts and send them off to those who were less fortunate than ourselves. I'm sure you can all remember the shoebox appeals to spread a bit of kindness to far from corners of the earth. Well, those days have gone. You don't have to worry about the size of the parcels. You don't have to worry the distance they're going to travel, because poverty is on our doorstep. Schools, teachers and support staff are going out their way to feed and clothe our children. Schools are becoming the fourth support service. Recognising the issue, I used part of my allowance to set up a breakfast club in a primary school in Failsworth so that children did not start school without food in their stomachs. This summer, the Oldham Education Partnership sets up a number of centres and activities where young people could be fed without being labelled as being poor in our wars to combat food poverty. When schools are not there, who will pick up the pieces? Or do we allow the most vulnerable members of this society to go hungry?
So, Jakes, we're out of time.
This government is indifferent to the suffering and hardship, and this is having a negative impact on everybody. I urge the Council to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ball.
This year, the government announced that they were running a pilot project on holiday hunger. They called it the Holiday Activities and Food Research Fund. Information of this was sent out on the 28th of March. We found out about it accidentally on the 10th of April. The responses had to be in for the 18th of April. It stated that each project would get from £250,000. The specification also outlined that the bidders should be able to deliver at scale and over a short time scale, as there would only be 4 weeks from the agreement of the funding to the start of the school holidays. Procurement and tendering made it that the LA could not apply. Obviously, we didn't get the bid. However, the work that we did was not in vain. The Growing Oldham Feeding Ambition Group, Gopher, gave $10,000 to help pay for food for some of the projects. Gopher has since managed to get some food for external funding for a food partnership coordinator role, and that will lead on holiday hunger in the coming year. But this year we did have some sessions running in Oldham, like in Stoneleigh Park, where the Friends of the Park run holiday sessions. There the children forage for herbs and veg that grow in the park. They then help to prepare them, and then everyone eats together when the food is cooked. It's very interesting that families using the park at that time then start to wander into the compound to see what's happening, and they get fed too. There's a lot of work being done at GM level by the Greater Manchester Poverty Action Group, and we are working with 2 of their subgroups, Children in Food Poverty and Food Banks and Beyond. We are hoping to have a Greater Manchester-wide website soon where people will be able to find out where their nearest food bank is and when it is open. What came over at the Food Bank and Beyond subgroup on this was the need to have a variety of food banks. We need to have some that do not require vouchers. Having to find someone who can give you a voucher is demeaning. One lady said that a quarter of her clients had no redress to public funds, either now or in the future. Also, the food banks need to have information available for them to signpost people to, like debt counselling, job clubs, training, fuel poverty, homelessness, welfare rights, citizens' advice, early help, growing and cookery skills. Very similar to the Ancora project across the road. Our Community Horizon project works alongside volunteers who are trying to take over the running of our underused community buildings. It's from these that this type of support is given, like on Sholver, where we have weekly food bank with the support from Early Help. There's also a group of volunteers there who cook something to eat for lunch. It's usually great soup. There is also a community fridge. At Neon on Holt Street, there's a community cafe, citizens' advice sessions and counselling sessions for some local teenagers. Our volunteers are like gold, and without them, support services would be lacking. We need to support these volunteers trying to run these centres and groups. Oldham is looking at having a Poverty Truth Commission as what they've had in Salford and Leeds. This is slowly taking shape. This commission will not alleviate poverty, but will help people through the system, making things easier and simpler. So what else can we do? There are some suggestions in the resolution, but there are others. Can we liaise with the Mayor, Andy Burnham, to try and get Greater Manchester a fair share of any holiday hunger monies that are available next year? Can we support the Food Partnership Coordinator when they come to work for us? Can we further map out what services are out there and pass it on to the new website when it comes online? Can we make sure that what help is available is widely known? Can we support all the groups that work with this? And can we look at all areas of the council? Do they consider poverty when putting their policies together? We need to continue to work alongside the Poverty Agenda Group and Action Together, as well as our other community and faith groups. Child and family poverty should be a thing of the past. It isn't, and we have to deal with it and treat people who are struggling with this with respect.
Thank you very much. A number of colleagues have expressed interest to talk. So, Councillor Mushtaq.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I've said it before, and I know that I'll say it again whilst this government is still in place. This isn't a motion that should be coming to a council meeting in 21st century Britain. A motion entitled Tackling Child Hunger, and let us remember that motions brought here have to be relevant to Oldham. Within the motion is the term child holiday hunger, the reason being that during the holidays the schools are closed, so can't feed hungry children. This government isn't content with cutting school funding, targeting children's education. It wants to remove the focus of education our children in other ways too. It wants children to go to school hungry, so as to create another obstacle for both the school and the children to hinder their development in every way possible. The same concept applies to council
leisure centres, libraries and community organisations. This government has cut and cut some more, but that wasn't enough. These organisations should be working towards ensuring we have thriving residents in a thriving borough, utilising thriving leisure centres, thriving libraries and thriving community organisations. Instead, we are talking about utilising these organisations, these assets, to feed our children when school is closed for the holidays. Is this what the government meant when it said, live within your means? Is this what this government meant when it said that we must all make sacrifices? Does the government know what the child poverty figures are? Of course it does. Does the government know that in 2017, Oldham had a child poverty figure of 40.66%? Yes, it does. So why is the motion seeking to, and I quote, investigate and apply for additional funding, additional external funding? Let us just take a minute to digest this. In 2017, Oldham's child poverty figure was 40.66%. In November 2018, a year later, we have a motion which is seeking to investigate and apply for additional funding, including using district budgets. What is the purpose of a government if our children are going hungry? Is it the job of the government to create the conditions where our children are going hungry? Is it the job of a government to contort the purpose of the institutions that help create functioning members of society? Libraries, community organisations and leisure centres being used to reduce child holiday hunger. And just listen to the phrases that have been created under this government. Child holiday hunger, that's a thing. Was that ever a thing in the past? I don't think it was. We now have models referenced in this motion being tried in other places. Models with names like Feed and Read and Feeding Britain. How disgraceful is it that these things now exist? Mr. Mayor, the Chancellor last week said that our sacrifices had paid off, that austerity is coming to an end. This isn't a tap that you can turn on or an on-off switch. The impact of what they've done will be felt for generations. Things are likely to get worse too with Brexit looming. Mr. Mayor, we didn't make a sacrifice. We have been sacrificed. And as the existence of this motion proves, our children have been sacrificed. Shame on this government and shame on the coalition before it that set all this in motion. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We start with Councillor Harkness. You have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this motion to tackle child hunger, the content of much of which has previously been proposed by the Liberal Democrats in this chamber, with varying levels of support from other parties. It is right, however, that we revisit, enhance and keep this on the agenda. Liberal Democrats have long since campaigned in this chamber to address child hunger, including calling for the Council to campaign for a greater take-up of free school meals. The motion worked towards tackling child hunger and enabling schools to access the additional funding to increase progress for students. The introduction of universal free school lunches for our youngest pupils was an innovation of the Liberal Democrats as a junior partner in the coalition government. And it is an achievement that I and my fellow Liberal Democrats are proud to defend. For many children from poorer backgrounds, a hot lunch is in the school day is the only nutritious meal that they are likely to enjoy. And there is plenty of evidence that children who are nutritionally fed perform better in the classroom and that their behaviour improves. In this chamber, we proposed the lobbying for universal free school meals for all primary-aged children, providing extra 10,000 children in Oldham and Saddleworth with free school meals. As an opposition party, we have pushed for the council to look at breakfast clubs in the borough, establish school holiday food clubs across the borough where there is a need, propose a fuel voucher scheme to Oldham, called for the council to host workshops for schools and academies, faith groups and voluntary sector partners, at which organisations offering financial, food and in-kind support to engage with food retailers to access more of the surplus food that is currently thrown away, to promote the take-up of healthy start vouchers to eligible residents. This motion links in with the administration's motion on creating healthy and thriving Oldham from early tonight. Addressing the health issues is a big job, and we need to get all groups working together to tackle these issues. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Agnes. Councillor Jabbar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is a really important topic, and I'm very grateful to Councillor Jake and Councillor Ball for bringing this to the Council's attention. Mr. Mayor, United Kingdom is the 5th largest economy in the country, and this government and the previous government has chosen to reduce the tax burden on corporation and millionaires to fund their priorities. And yet what they've done is introduce a massive reduction in the welfare benefit people get, either whether they're working or benefit when people are not working. And that's a direct result of the things that we're talking about today. So the government even last week, when they talked about the budget, they've said their aspiration is to reduce corporation tax to 17%. Well, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But the problem is that a very large section of our community is being left behind. Earlier, when the leader spoke, he said Oldham Council has been hit the 7th hardest since austerity in terms of the level of cuts that we've been handed down. £209 million has been taken away from our budgets to provide local services. And here's the real issue. And, you know, Councillor Harkness, you know, I'm very pleased you're saying what you're saying now, but your party was in coalition when the welfare reform took place, the Welfare Reform Act of 2013, which introduced the universal credit. And here's the real issue, Mr. Mayor. The universal credit is paid 4 weeks in advance, in arrears, not advance, in arrears. Why? Because these Tory people with the coalition here from the Lib Dems said that people need to be disciplined. They need to be disciplined. That if they are going to work, then they need to be paid every month, and they need to learn how to manage their finances. Absolute rubbish. These people, they need, Mr. Mayor, paying every week. Sometimes they need paying every day because they can't put food on the table for their children. That's how bad it is. And this idea about this monthly payment is a middle class thing. Even the architect of universal credit, Ian Duncan Smith, has admitted, and he made a representation to the Chancellor then, George Osborne, to change it. And the reason why it wasn't changed is purely financial. Nothing else. The system is online. If you make an application, it's an online application, and they can verify your entitlement within minutes. The only reason it's done, friends and comrades, is because it's a political ideology that they want to punish people by introducing that delay. And we're seeing in my own ward, which has got the highest level of child poverty in the whole of the country. I'm ashamed of that. But what can we do? This is a government bent on punishing the poor people. And it's absolutely right in this chamber that we're standing up those people, not just in our borough, but throughout the whole of the country. And here's my plea, Mr. Mayor, that in next 18 months, the government is coming up with a new funding formula to support local government to make sure that we get the right level of funding to provide local services. It's called fair funding. And I ask the government and everybody connected, please, for sake of our children, sake of their future, provide decent level of resources so that we can provide a decent level of resources to them to make a decent living. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jabbar. Councillor Hazel Gloucester, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do welcome the introduction of a borough-wide initiative to tackle child holiday hunger. As we know, there are approximately 170 days a year where children cannot access free school meals. Teachers report that holiday hunger is affecting far more children now than it was 3 years ago. And there is strong concern that local initiatives designed to tackle it, including food banks, are not actually equipped to meet the demand. Research shows that a staggering 78% of households helped by food banks have skipped meals or even gone days without eating in the past 12 months. This is obviously more acute during holiday periods when free school meals are not available. There are hundreds of successful initiatives running both nationwide and across Oldham. And with this in mind, we really do not need to reinvent the wheel. I therefore support this motion with the plea that a borough-wide intervention is implemented as swiftly as possible, is consistent, is publicised appropriately and is managed effectively to ensure that those needing this additional support are aware of it and know exactly how to access it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gloucester, for a short and pertinent reply. Councillor Steve Williams, thank you. Sorry? Okay. Seems as though we've been asked to move to the vote. Does everybody agree to the... Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, Councillor Jakes, would you like to have the right to reply?
I'd just like to say that free school meals don't feed children in the evenings or at weekends or during the holidays. George Osborne made it acceptable and palatable to attack people who are claiming working benefits or claiming unemployment benefits. What we've heard tonight is just the tip of the iceberg, because someone living near you is facing the same difficulties. And all I would say to you when you go tonight, would you want to walk a mile in their shoes? Because clearly we have something in our midst that we need to cure and get rid of, and by doing so, get rid of this Tory government. Thank you.
Thank you. So, can we all show a vote of for the motion? Okay, let's all. Unanimous. Yes, is that okay? Unanimous. Any abstentions? No abstentions. So that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll move on to motion 2. Can I call on Councillor Taylor to move and Councillor McLaren to second the motion? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On the 11th of October of this year, it was announced that 74 Crown Post offices across the UK, including Oldham's Crown Office, will be franchised into WH Smith's shops. Yet on that very same day the announcement was made, WH Smiths themselves confirmed 20 store closures and issued profit warnings, with a business model going forward based on its travel concession and a move away from the high street. So what does this mean for the future of our Crown Post Office network? Well, here in Oldham, it certainly means a loss of service, as Post Office Limited has already confirmed that the UK Visa and Immigration Biometric Enrolment Service will not continue, and that the ATM at the site will also be lost. It also means a longer walk for residents travelling by bus, and access for elderly and disabled customers will be more difficult. Post Office Limited has acknowledged that Oldham is a particularly busy branch, and so there is no public interest in closing a profitable office or relocating it to an inferior site. The rights of Post Office employees also remain at risk. Although there will be no forced redundancies, the reality is that the vast majority of Post Office employees do not want to work for a company that offers inferior terms and conditions. Therefore, here in Oldham, we will lose decades' worth of experience in favour of minimum wage, insecure, part-time jobs. There is no doubt that the services offered in WH Smiths will be of a lesser quality than we currently have. Research from mystery shoppers has shown that customers wait up to 5 times longer and services are more expensive in franchised outlets. Also, WH Smiths has just been voted the UK's worst high street retailer, again by Which Readers. They have come bottom of this survey for 5 out of the past 8 years and second worst for the other 3. In addition, the closure of many of our banks has impacted severely on the high street, but the banking framework agreement between the banks and the post office was supposed to bridge that gap, which is why it is so important for the post office to maintain a visible presence on the high street and not to be hidden away in the back of a shop. This was a prime opportunity for Post Office Limited to increase their product portfolio and presence in the community. But the truth of the matter is that the Post Office and Royal Mail should never have been split up. The most successful postal organisations around the world have all kept their retail and delivery arms together because the result is one of greater benefit and efficiency. The government made great play on keeping the Post Office in public ownership whilst privatising Royal Mail, because they know that the Post Office isn't just a place for posting parcels, it is at the heart of local communities. But that heart is being torn away through closure, privatisation and neglect. This government may claim to be on the side of workers, but here is yet another example of well-rewarded, secure jobs disappearing from public service by handing them over to a minimum wage employer and a struggling business to boot. This may be the last roll of the dice for WH Smiths, but we should not be gambling away the future of a great British institution. The brazen and unscrupulous actions of public sector organisation that puts profit over people and personal bonus over social responsibility to local communities is something that should be condemned. This government is being driven by a privatisation agenda that is blind to the needs of our communities, and the deliberate destruction of our Crown Post Office network will use an estimated £30 million of public money for the latest tranche of closures. This situation is financially absurd, but the losers are the British public and the hard-working staff, both of whom deserve better.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions. Yeah. Okay, Councillor McCarran.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to second this motion. As Elaine said, it was recently announced that 74 Crown Post Offices across the UK, including 8 in the North West, will be franchised to WH Smith. This means the loss of some 60% of the national Crown Post Office network since 2013. In effect, this is a privatisation by stealth which has been occurring on an ongoing basis since the separation of Royal Mail and the Post Office some 5 years ago. The move is backdoor privatisation of the main Crown Post Offices that have been traditionally run directly by the Post Office. Like the NHS and the BBC, the Post Office is a treasured national organisation which is being asked to hand over large Crown offices in prime locations. Frankly, it is an admission that the strategic direction of the Post Office is fundamentally flawed. It is an absolute nonsense to suggest that WH Smith can run a major post office better than the Post Office itself. It is also evident that CWU members do not wish to work for WH Smith, which has a track record of 0-hour contracts and a minimum wage approach to staffing and resourcing. Not surprisingly, the CWU are concerned about potential job losses as well as cuts to pay and benefits to staff. More than 800 jobs could be at risk from the closure or privatisation of Crown offices. It is worth remembering that hundreds of long-term staff were made redundant when WH Smith took on an initial batch of post offices in 2006. It should be recognised that these privatisations are to be financed by using millions of pounds of public money, despite the fact that the public have never endorsed the closures. They have only ever protested against them. The closure of our Crown Post Offices and relocation to a WH Smith store also means the loss of prime high street premises. In turn, this contributes to the demise of our town centres. No explanation has been given as to why the profit-making Crown Post Offices are being handed to a failing retailer with an uncertain future. It is worth asking what will happen to these services if WH Smith should collapse. All Crown Post Offices in the North West are under threat of closure and/or franchising in the future. If the latest round of privatisations are allowed to go ahead, it could be the tipping point for the viability of the entire post office network. Our post offices are a key asset for the wider community. The expertise and experience of the staff in all of these offices is invaluable. This government should therefore halt these closures and bring together stakeholders, including the trade unions and industry experts, to develop a new strategy that safeguards the future of the post office service. I ask you to give unanimous support to this motion and call for the post office to be reintegrated back into the Royal Mail Group. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McCarran. Unfortunately, we run out of time for colleagues to wish to speak against this motion, so Okay.
Mr Mayor, as a sub-postmaster for 17 years, I would like to speak on this because I don't think we can vote without having proper debate. If we can't do it tonight, it needs to be rolled over.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time because we've allocated...
Move suspension of standing orders.
So the time allocated has expired, so we need to go to the vote, unfortunately. So we can go for a recorded vote. Hands up those colleagues who've requested for a recorded vote. Okay, thank you. It's above 5, thank you. Okay, so... yeah.
Are you ready? You ready? Councillor Ahmed, Councillor Akhtar, Councillor Alexander, Councillor Ali, Councillor Azad, Councillor Ball, Councillor Bashforth Marie, Councillor Bashforth Stephen, Councillor Briggs, Councillor Brownridge, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Chatterton, Councillor Shohan, Councillor Cosgrove, Councillor Curley, Councillor Davis, Councillor Dean, Councillor Fielding, Councillor Gary, Councillor Gloucester Chris, Councillor Gloucester Hazel, Councillor Goodwin, Councillor Hack.
He's not here. He's not
Oh.
here.
Councillor Harkness, Councillor Harrison, Councillor Heffernan, Councillor Hewitt, Councillor Hussain, Councillor Jabbar, Councillor Jakes, Councillor Judd, Councillor Leach, Councillor Malik, Councillor McLaren, Councillor Murphy, Councillor Mushtaq, Councillor Pythian, Councillor Price, Councillor Kumar, Councillor Raymond, Councillor Roberts, Councillor Salamat, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Sheldon, Councillor Shuttleworth, Councillor Stretton, Councillor Sykes, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Williams, Councillor Williamson, Councillor Iqbal.
4.
That concludes.
So the motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. So as regards to motion 3, we're going to have to roll it over to next, Councillor Shaw. Sorry? Right, so, thank you. So motion 3 is going to be rolled over to the next meeting. Yeah. So we move on to item agenda 14, notice of opposition business. I call on Councillor Sykes to move and Councillor H. Gloucester to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I make no apologies for the motion in front of you tonight, which is about conductors on trams, and in particular conductors on trams on the Oldham-Rochdale line. We've had, and it's been referred to already in Council tonight, reference to the very successful Operation Infinity, which has been in response, and that's the issue, in response to some instances, some quite horrendous instances that have happened on the line. But unlike its name, it won't be there forever. And it was a response to a couple of really violent instances, but a level of general antisocial behaviour that, to be honest, since shortly after the trams were introduced, has been tolerated. So I welcome what the leader said tonight, and we need to be more ambitious. It's not good enough for Oldham or Rochdale that the decent travelling public have to put up with what some of them have put up with on our trams. And conductors, to me, is a very sensible way of tackling the issue. Not only does it work from a public safety point of view, not only does it work with being able to assist people, be they infirm, disabled, partially sighted, or whatever, on and off the tram, in terms of information, even in terms of, and I can't be the only person who's got to a tram stop to not find a functioning ticket machine, and it does happen surprisingly due to some of the Herberts we have. And then what do? Do you ride the tram illegally? Do you do something else? If you're lucky, you can cross to the other side of the platform, and while you do, you watch your tram leave. Tell me, I've been there more than once. So I just think conductors is a sensible solution. The other thing it tackles is 1 in 8 users across the network, that's the whole Metrolink network, don't pay a fare. They're fare dodgers. So decent, hard-working, some of the people we've talked about tonight, Oldhamers, that pay their dues, would have to pay less if everybody paid what they should do. And that's across the network. It will come as no surprise which is the worst line for fare dodging across the whole network. It's the Oldham, Rochdale, Manchester line. And also particular stops, I'm afraid, and we've been targeted for that, are on King Street and in Oldham Town Centre. So conductors would then begin to tackle that issue. And if you've sat on a tram, and there's many of us in here do, you can actually see it, and there is more of a uniform presence. You know, nice, I was on a tram during the day, 2 nice PCSOs got on and whatever, and everybody behaves, and then 4 or 5 Metrolink staff get on and get off, and as they get on, you can see the 3 or 4 lads can get off on the other door and sit on the platform and wait till the next tram comes with nobody on it, then they get back on it. It happens, and we need to nail them people, or you get some sob story that they couldn't pay on the phone because, you know, whatever. It's, when I were at school, it was about you left your homework on the bus or the dog ate it or something like that. In terms of some of the excuses, if you ever listen to them, that some people come up with about not having a valid ticket. Somebody should write a book, but they don't. So, trams have conductors on them in Sheffield. Good enough for Yorkshire, it's good enough for us. They have them in Wolverhampton and Birmingham on that line, and most of us here will have been on a tram in Blackpool that have conductors. So it's not unknown, it solves 2 problems. It improves safety, it improves the customer experience, and it stops fare dodging. And if it brings anything back in of our share of that £9 million that's lost across the network, it'll self-fund itself. So to me, it's a no-brainer, and I commend the motion to Council. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sykes. Councillor Gloucester, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I second the motion proposed by Councillor Sykes as a tram user myself and also as the parent of a frequent tram user. In the last month, we have seen 3 youths jailed for a significant period of time after a horrific attack at an Oldham tram stop. That can be seen on social media, showing the ferocity of the attack, and probably the only reason why the victim survived was because of the actions of other tram users in stopping the attack. You only need to ride on the tram from Shaw to Manchester and vice versa, particularly in the evening time, to see youths hopping on and off the tram and observe their general conduct to believe that the tram is a mobile resource for their antisocial behaviour. The mobility of their behaviour, which is probably for free to them, at the expense of other tram users. Social media itself is a good resource for gauging what the issues are on the trams, with numerous examples quoted of fare dodging, misconduct, theft and assaults. In my own ward, we have been grateful of the efforts of Greater Manchester Police and Travel Safe officers in addressing an issue where youths were coming in from other neighbourhoods into Shaw, wreaking havoc and then leaving by tram back to their own communities. One of my own constituents was subject to a robbery quite recently at the Shaw tram stop. where he was attacked and had his mobile phone stolen. Other examples where people have had their coats ripped off them and even been robbed of their designer trainers, leaving them shoeless. We also regularly see examples of passengers being racially abused by other passengers. Most of us here are actually old enough to remember travelling to school or out to socialise on the bus. Although as youngsters we were probably a little more boisterous than most, any misconduct would be severely reprimanded by the conductor. And if you were really unlucky, you would be thrown off and have to wait for the next one. We never got robbed, assaulted or abused though, and the reassuring presence of a conductor then speaks volumes now, as it did for our parents and would reassure myself as a parent of a tram user now. Something has to be done, and the obvious answer is conductors on trams. The motion sets out the loss of revenue to the tram system caused by fare dodging, but a knock-on effect to that is the cost of the economy dealing with theft, vandalism, antisocial behaviour, plus a significant cost for police investigations when they have to investigate serious crime on and around the tram service as the result of a largely unpoliced network that allows any person practically free access to travel anywhere in Greater Manchester, with only a minimal chance of being challenged. The motion I second, asking for a trial period on the Rochdale-Oldham Metrolink tram line as a pilot project, should pay for itself in lost revenue, increase revenue for Metrolink, reduce crime and disorder, go a long way towards making tram travel safe, reassure both tram users and the public alike, and have a positive effect on the wider economy. I therefore ask you to support this motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gloucester. A number of colleagues have expressed interest to speak, so Councillor Murphy, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've stopped using the trams. It's turned into a free taxi for undesirables, and to be honest, it's just putting me off. I seem to be a magnet for these people who, for some reason, choose to sit next to me, and I have to suffer. And you know what's worrying? You get on at Manchester, and then, no matter, you know, wherever I get off, they're there. And I must tell my dad not to keep following me home. But on a serious note, these undesirables, they're just causing problems on there. They're making it not safe for the users of this service. There's people getting on that are spiced out their head, and you know, that is just like watching an episode of The Walking Dead. It's been used for ASAP. My colleagues have already mentioned about people coming in from out of town causing ASB. And I know this is in other wards as well. The fare dodgers are just taking the mickey out of us, and it's fantastic that this recent initiative with Travel Safe and GMP has yielded some results. But here's the thing, if you had conductors on the trams, you wouldn't have to deal and be reactive with it. Let's be proactive and let's just deal with it now. I just ask that you don't let the undesirables win, and you support the genuine commuters who pay the fair share and expect a fair service and to feel safe. I ask you to support the motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Fielding, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Members around the chamber will probably recall the response that was given at a question that I was asked by the Leader of the Opposition at the previous council meeting, at which I replied, if it were cost effective for there to be inspectors on the trams, they would be on there. And I'm pleased that Operation Infinity took place as a result of meetings held with the Mayor and with the Chiefs of Police and TFGM down at Greater Manchester, along with local MPs and other people who have an interest in the line. And I am shocked, I am genuinely shocked at the outcome of that investigation and the level of fare evasion. It was far beyond anything that I think anybody appreciated. And the level of antisocial behaviour, of course, was unacceptable for a long time on the trams, and Operation Infinity has had some success in reducing the amount of antisocial behaviour. I do want to, however, pull Councillor Murphy up on some of the rather alarmist description that he's used of his experiences on the trams. You know, I'm a recent user of the tram, and it is nowhere near how it was. However, it is clear that there is a significant amount of public money being lost because of the numbers of people that are avoiding paying the fare on the trams. And if one way to tackle that is to trial the introduction of ticket inspectors, of conductors on trams, just on our line, then I and my group are happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. Councillor Williamson, did you put your hand up? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Dave says, we haven't been on the tram for a while, and we did experience some of that stuff, and it was absolutely appalling to see. Across the country, we have 8 light rail and tram systems, one of which is Manchester. Our network consists of 7 lines, 62 miles and 93 stops, and it's the largest in the UK. And the Oldham to Rochdale line has had a lot of publicity. In the financial year ending March 2018, the latest figures show that Manchester Metrolink usage figures are continuing to increase when compared with the previous year. With this in mind, surveys have shown that the major constraint on the public using the tram is for fear of safety and security. This is not just a perception, but it has been magnified by the press on various acts of vandalism on the trams and at tram stops. Not only is there concern for safety for members of the public, but their staff have been subjected to verbal abuse, spitting and actual physical abuse. There is also vandalism on trams, whether that is somebody kicking in a window, urinating or being sick inside the tram itself, costing money for it to be repaired or cleaned up. Plus the cost of the time of the driver due to sickness and dealing with incidents. In Nottingham, I think it was, they got inspectors from the train operators and police staff to check tickets on trams and stuff like that, and that really helped. As has been mentioned, we've had this new initiative since April of this year on Oldham to Rochdale, and I believe that has helped. Now, if all this has been done, why is it we're still getting all this publicity about antisocial behaviour? It's appalling. If conductors were on platforms and trams checking tickets, I know you've just said, Councillor Fielding, that the cost of the amount of money they lose wouldn't cover conductors, but I'd beg to differ. But it's not about that. It's about allowing passengers to feel safe when they are travelling around Greater Manchester, which is safe to say a lot of people don't feel like that. Why should a young boy who's just paid for his ticket and is minding his own business be verbally abused just for using the tram? Why should a young Asian man be racially abused just for using the tram? Why should a young girl waiting for the tram be assaulted because she's on her way to meet up with friends and is all dressed up? And why should an elderly person be mocked and hounded for wanting to sit in a priority seat? In 2018, this should not be allowed to happen, and we shouldn't have to convince anyone that we need conductors on trams, because up and down the country, having them on platforms and trams has helped passengers feel more safe and curbed antisocial behaviour. I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else with that mind?
Is it seconded?
Okay, it's been seconded. Okay. Councillor Sykes, would you like to have the right to reply before we go to the vote?
Very briefly, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thank you for your support, Sean. I mean, there's a number of different things, and we could talk about this a lot, but if we'd agreed on it, that's fine. Because I've got a whole list here of things, and I just think this is our premier transport system. We've had a motion. We talked about poverty in children. We got something about air quality, getting people out of the cars. This was part of the ticket, but if people, the perception or the reality is, it doesn't matter which, people won't go on it, we're going to drive more cars back on the road. And we all, due to some of the, and we need to restore confidence in the line. So I'm happy that we're going to champion that. And in some senses, if it's good enough for the other tram networks, if it's good enough for parts of Northern Rail, I don't see why it can't be good enough for us to establish that culture of pain and of safety. And with that, Mr Mayor, let's hope we can all vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favour of the motion? Okay. Unanimous? Yes. Thank you. That's carried. We move to motion 2. Councillor Chris Gloucester to move and Councillor Harkness to second. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So we've just been hearing about trams and clean air and things like that. Now I'm going to talk about roads and potholes. So I suppose we've got rid of all the cars. We won't have any pothole issues, would we? But there we go. We have. I rise to propose a motion as set out in the Green Book. Now then, at last month's full council, Councillor Dave Murphy asked a very similar question that surrounds this motion concerning road surface erosion and the fabled 40mm depth. So it's fair to ask why has this been brought back to council as a motion. One of the principal reasons for this is simply because the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhoods, who in fairness to Councillor Shah, told us how it is, and that is in particular of the review at Greater Manchester level, and that the 40mm depth was affirmed as an appropriate level. So, you know, the holes in Westminster are the same holes in Greater Manchester as in 40mm. But is that acceptable to us as a council? Well, it's certainly not acceptable to our pedal cyclists, it's certainly not acceptable to our motorcyclists, and it's certainly not acceptable to some of our car driving road users, because cars these days, particularly the cheaper end, and then some of the dearer end that have fancy suspension on them, just are not capable of dealing with these 40mm potholes, or even surface erosion where it's not 40mm, but where the top surface has become worn away and people really struggle to drive on it. A good example is when I drive to work in the morning. I go through right north, yeah, as quick as I can. So, apart from where the speed camera is, which, funnily enough, is where the problem is. But as you go down Middleton Road, Royton, between Agate and Cinderella, I can honestly say that is the worst piece of road that I can think of. That's a secondary route, as we like to call them, in this borough. The road surface is so rutted that if you drive down the road and you haven't got a firm grip of your steering, the road surface will actually steer your car and push you over into the other side of the road. So needless to say, you know, if we were to look at that road in line with the principles of what currently stand, as in the 40mm rule, etc., then there's nothing up with that road. But, you know, I've actually spoken to the ward councillors about this, to Councillor Pythian, Fidian, I've spoken to Clint about it, so yeah, if everybody just calls him Clint now, there won't be any confusion. Anyway, I've spoken to Clint about it, and, you know, the ward councillors are up in arms about it, as everybody else. It needs doing, but it hasn't been done. But at the current level, then it doesn't have to be done. But it does, because, you know, road users in this borough don't accept it, and it isn't acceptable. It's dangerous. But the council can't be sued for it. So if the council can't be sued for it, then they don't have to do it. So, anyway, moving on. The issue is that we, as a council, although Greater Manchester say that you know, they're happy with the 40mm, and the government say they are, then we, as a council, should not be, and I would ask you that you support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harkness.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am seconding this motion to continue the Liberal Democrats' tradition in our priority to improve the standards of our roads in this borough. That is why the Liberal Democrats have called on year in budget amendments to increase the amount spent on road repairs, but has been rejected by other councillors. My colleagues and I have raised issues with potholes many times in this chamber. Following our nagging to work smarter, the inefficiency of how potholes are repaired is starting to improve. We need to work smarter again. We need to get away from Oldham's threshold of 40 millimetres. Some former cobbled streets in my area wouldn't qualify for that because the amount above is not 40 millimetres. My colleague, the Leader of the Opposition, as well as Councillor Murphy, have raised this issue in the Council chamber regarding the 40 millimetres, and we now want the Council to adopt a policy which looks at the risk rather than a cut-off of 40 millimetres and then nothing. Members may say that that's not practical, but extra investment and prioritising, as suggested in this motion, makes the policy viable. I could have put claims in against the council myself, and I know that there are 7 claims on one road in Diggle in 1 year. As I've said, Liberal Democrats would increase the amount spent on road repairs, but to fully address the problem, the government needs to invest properly in our roads. In the budget this year, the Chancellor has made a pledge for an extra £420 million for pothole repairs. But like most things in this budget, in the budget is a sticking plaster and does nothing nowhere near to address the chronic underfunding in local government in recent years. Now, the Local Government Association estimate that there was a £9 billion backlog on road repairs. So we need to support the Local Government Association on pushing government to allocate some of the road fuel duty raised to deal with this pothole issue properly. The Labour Party leader at the budget criticised that this was an investment in roads, criticised an investment in roads at all and said it should just be spent on public transport. I would suggest that we need to do both. We should repair dangerous potholes first and not simply operate to some arbitrary threshold. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I call on Councillor Shaw to move and Councillor Alexander to second an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Gloucester and Councillor Harkness. In the last budget, the Lib Dems had asked for 5 million, and the fact that we put in 6.2 million and we just agreed another 12 million over the next 3 years, I think is a clear evidence of our commitment to improving the roads. And although what I think the Lib Dems should do is make a tradition of reading like policy, because our existing policy already reflects the points that the opposition made in their motion. That's why we amended it. And surely we have an exceptional highways team, and I'd like to place on record my thanks to the team and my admiration for their patience in not just balancing their roles and the budget constraints, but also the continuous badgering they get to honour individual member requests, and I include myself in this. Just in the last year alone, the team had 1,399 jobs raised to repair potholes, of which they have completed 1,387. As an administration, there's never been a lack of understanding of the concerns residents have around the state of our highways, and residents' safety, needless to say, is always a priority. The leader alluded to in his annual statement earlier on that how serious he is about the condition of our highways, and he has ensured strictly that the £6.2 million highways investment should ensure that our roads, including potholes, concentrate on those that haven't been previously prioritised. Our capital investment to date has focused on the main routes, and the commitment in the funding for the next 3 years is that the investment will move to secondary routes, ensuring that members are involved in the process of prioritisation. Our existing policy uses investigatory levels, basically saying, as you both mentioned, that if those levels are at 40 millimetres for a carriageway or 25 millimetres for pavement, then we will repair them. And where an inspection shows a large number of defects on a road and any major defects are made safe, and then the work is listed for full resurfacing within the capital programme. However, the courts are clear in the expectation that we must undertake repairs that are blatantly dangerous, even where they do not meet criteria, and therefore any reported dangerous repairs would be undertaken. And an example of that would be if there was a pothole or a defect that is below the 40 millimetres but is on a pedestrian crossing and therefore presents a danger, we would of course repair it. So Mr Mayor, I'd like to move the amendment to the motion.
Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Sean. I would just like to say that the work of our Highways Department this summer has been outstanding since the beast from the east arrived in the past winter and spring. We have put on extra teams to repair roads and potholes. I would welcome the extra money for the Saddleworth and Lees area, which takes up 52% of the total area of OMBC, and this could be helped by our local Tory councillors lobbying their unfair Tory government for more money, because a lot of the roads now are past their sell-by date and need full repairs. Also, an idea would be, if you do get contacted, is to pick the phone up and ring the pothole line to get it done. Recently, I was contacted and for 3 roads to be repaired in Saddleworth North, I think it was, and I can assure you that the work was done within 48 hours from contact, and the Community Association of Austerlands thanked me for it. So I think they're doing a rather good job. I don't think you should stop your whinging and moaning, and if you need useful numbers, I can always deliver these on your area, Garth. Help you out. And you, Graham. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Unfortunately, I apologise, but we've run out of time for colleagues. We've only got 2 minutes left for colleagues to ask any questions or observations. So I'd like to pass the mic back to Councillor Gloucester for right to reply.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. To be frank, we don't agree with the amendment. There's just a couple of points. Well, there's 3 points I want to make. I'm quite looking. I like you as a mayor, but I'm quite looking forward to hearing me one. But the serious points that I want to make is just in relation to the budget. And I know Councillor Shah mentioned at last year we were looking at putting an extra 5 million in, and then what's been spent this year. But and I may be incorrect, but I'm pretty certain that when I was at the cabinet meeting as an observer at the last cabinet meeting, initially there was 18 million, and then that 18 million over 3 years has been spread now over 4 years. So the investment in the roads is less than it was supposed to be at the last full council budget meeting. But you know, I stand to be corrected, but I'm pretty certain, having read it backwards and forwards, that that's correct. But no, we don't accept the amendment. But the one thing I would say is there's no criticism of our council team in relation to highways. At the end of the day, they are a hard-working team, but they can only do, you know, what they can do. If there was more money, they would be able to do a lot more. People would be happier. There isn't. But, you know, we have no criticism of the council team. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gloucester. Councillor Shaw, would you like to... very quick. Okay. Does Council agree to the amendment as amended? All hands up, please. Yes, that's what I said, amendment, as amended.
Yes, it does. That does Council agree the amendment, all those in favour?
So all the colleagues are in favour of amendment? Yes? Okay, thank you. So that's carried?
No.
No?
We'll go to all those against.
Apologies. Are all those against? Okay. It's been a long day. It's been a long day. Okay. Any... The amendment is... any abstentions? No? Okay, so the amendment is carried.
So then we're going to the substantive motion.
Okay, so...
so they'll go straight to the vote on the substantive motion.
So we need to go to the substantive motion. Please, all those in favour? As amended. Okay. That's unanimous. Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so that's carried. Thank you very much. We're going to move to motion 3. Yeah. Do we have time for that or not? Okay. We move on to motion 3. I have had notice from Councillor Sykes that okay, thank you. Councillor Sykes wishes to. Councillor Heffernan. Okay, so motion 3 has been withdrawn. Do we need to take a vote on that? So everybody's agreed to that? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. 15A, minutes of the Joint Authority minutes. I call on the spokespersons present at the meeting of the Joint Authority meetings to move the minutes as submitted. Greater Manchester Health and Care Board, Councillor Fielding.
Move, Mr. Mayor.
Police and Crime Panel, Councillor Williams.
Move, Mr. Mayor.
Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Councillor Fielding.
Move, Mr. Mayor.
National Park Authority, Councillor McLaren. Transport of Greater Manchester, Councillor Adrian Alexander. So do we go to the questions or not? Yeah. Do any members of the council have a question on the minutes? Thank you. Do any members of the council have an observation on the minutes? Councillor Sykes, okay, sir. Thank you.
Brief, Mr. Mayor, because I'm aware of the time. If you remember, page 97 it is, Greater Manchester Combined Authority minutes, introduction of zonal FIRS structure on Metrolink network. Staying with a bit of a theme here. If you remember, Metrolink was forced into having a last-minute and very short consultation on this. Extensive, a number of people responded to it. The sum total of the consultation was to move the boundary of a Manchester station, and as will be known, didn't move the boundary of the Sean Crompton one, and now under this zonal FIRS structure. I just think it's another example where we get a really poor deal out of Metrolink. It's about without the link to Piccadilly. We now get the zonal FIRS, where the ridiculous situation is, and you'll all tell me, you know, we need to be happy citizens of the borough of Oldham. It has got to be wrong. It is cheaper to get to Rochdale Town Centre than Oldham Town Centre from my tram stop, and we should have had it moved. It's a crying shame, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sykes. Can I ask the relevant member to respond to the observation submitted? No? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I wouldn't disagree with Councillor Sykes about how this is a crying shame. It would have been ideal if we could bring every tram stop within the borough of Oldham into the same zonal fare structure. And it wasn't despite lobbying from not just myself, and I know that Councillor Sykes did some himself too, but also from members of Shaw and Crompton Labour Party who I know felt very strongly about this. Unfortunately, we were unable to get the result that we wanted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. We'll move on to item agenda 15B, minutes of partnerships. I call on the spokespersons of the partnerships to move, note the minutes as submitted. Health and Wellbeing Board, Councillor Harrison. Oldham Leadership Board, Councillor Fielding. Mayo Care, Councillor Chuan. That was Councillor Chuan. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Well, it's got Councillor Chuan written on, but no worries, it's just moved. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Do any members of the council have questions on the minutes? No? Okay, thank you. Any observations? Yes? Okay, thank you. But you can do if you want to. Update on actions from Council. I call on Councillor Fielding to move and Councillor Sykes to second the reports. Okay? Thank you. Brexit update. Is it? No, not yet. Does any member wish to speak on the details? No? Okay. Does the Council agree to recommendations as detailed within the report? Thank you. Brexit update. I call on Councillor Fielding to move and Councillor Sykes to second the report.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And even though I have just looked at my phone and we've got 4 minutes to go, and I do think it's important to say something about this, this is an example of something that should be much higher up the council agenda, because the implications of Brexit are going to be felt right across Oldham, and I'm afraid to say probably not in a particularly positive way. I think just taking the summary of the report, the summary on the front page of the report, that says that the Brexit Monitor reports that GDP, gross domestic product, has grown 0.7%, but the pre-Brexit it was predicted that it would grow 2.1%. So I know that the Remain side fought the economic argument. I didn't fight it particularly well, and nobody was listening, because in the end it was more about heart and emotion that people voted on, rather than on the economic arguments for remaining in the EU. But when it comes to heart and emotion, the implications of such a significant fall in gross domestic product and such a significant impact on our economy will have a significant impact on our public services, which will pull at the heartstrings and will make people emotional. Lower tax revenues will mean less money for public services. That means less money for schools, that means less money for hospitals, that means less money for a whole range of things that people value. It will also mean lower jobs opportunities in the long run, and we already know that we have to fight hard to get decent, well-paid job opportunities for the people of Oldham, and this is going to make it even more difficult if what this report says come to pass. Now, what we're now seeing is that the most likely outcome is a no-deal Brexit. A no-deal Brexit which businesses are preparing for by stopping investing, announcing that they are moving offshore, stockpiling ingredients, stockpiling medication for the NHS. And we're supposed to believe that Theresa May has the capacity to negotiate a good deal with the EU? It's not the EU that seems to be the barrier here. It's her own cabinet. She has to negotiate a deal through her own cabinet. These are people that she has chosen herself to be around the cabinet table, and she can't get it through them. And we're supposed to have faith in her to negotiate with people from across the other side of the English Channel with a range of different competing interests? I don't think so. People should read and digest this report. It is very worrying, and the implications for Oldham of a no-deal Brexit, which looks like the most likely outcome, will be incredibly disastrous. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sykes.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Wouldn't disagree with a word of that, Sean. It's about 3 or 4 times we've all agreed tonight. I'll be getting you in trouble, won't I? I'm sorry. I'll try and do better next time. Just one aspect I wouldn't disagree with that when we've talked about it tonight in terms of children, looked after children. What will happen to the adult social care sector and our NHS if a significant number of people who work in it suddenly feel they don't feel welcome here or aren't allowed to work in it? It won't just grind or slow down, it'll actually fall over. Adult social care, around 1/3 across the country of people who work in it are EU nationals. Sorry, might have got my phone too near the mic, Mr Mayor. And the same in terms of our health service. But it isn't just a question in terms of the EU nationals, it's actually about nationals from other countries, because if you're not careful, you create that environment where people don't feel welcome. Already, for whatever your reasons, and I understand there were some very good reasons why people voted the way they did, but actually some of those other people won't end up working here, and already there is already clear evidence of EU nationals returning elsewhere within Europe and leaving vacancies. And we talked earlier on the agenda tonight about building council houses or building homes for people. The construction industry alone will be bereft of, as a real skills shortage, if people from Poland and from other EU countries, as they are already doing by the thousands, decide to go and ply their trade somewhere else. And the last sector, not a big sector in Oldham, but a big sector elsewhere in some of the poorest places in the northwest, like Blackpool, is hospitality, will just stop.
Thank you, sir. We've actually run out of time, and this is one of the reasons why I was trying to push to gain time to discuss this, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. So, district plans. I call on the councillor. Okay. Does the councillor note the report for Brexit? Okay. Thank you. District plans. I call on Councillor Fielding to move and Councillor Sykes a second. Thank you. We don't have time for members to speak on this, so does Council agree on the recommendations of the detailed report? Thank you. Item agenda 19, constitutional amendments, procedural and land and property protocol. Calling Councillor Fielding to move and Councillor Sykes to second the report. Thank you. We don't have time for colleagues to speak on this. Does Council agree on the recommendations as detailed within the report? Thank you. Municipal Calendar 2019-2020. I call on Councillor Fielding to move and Councillor Sykes to second. Thank you. We don't have time for colleagues to speak, so does the Council agree to the recommendations as detailed within the report? Thank you. And this concludes the end of the business meeting this evening. However, I'd just like to take 2 seconds, not 2 seconds, but 60 seconds of your time. I'm sure you've all seen my video on social media and on the Council's website of me dressed up in different characters. However, as part of that, I've been challenged to a swimming marathon by an 80-year-old day lady. So we're going to swim a mile. Okay, so I'm seeking sponsorship for you people to see who can swim the mile, and also I'm also participating as one of the Mayor's challenges on the Santa Dash in Saddleworth. So please, if you've got any spare cash, come and see me or Nicola. Thank you very much. Thank you.